Hello and welcome to I gotta look up here, episode 47 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and as usual, we've got the goodly sized list of questions, including one question that may require its own separate video. And I just finished tearing apart a chicken coop. And also, the big news is that just yesterday I saw that we have at least two loaches left in our fish pond, which is like big excitement for me because I get loach insecurity. And I haven't seen two at the same time since like last year sometime. But the weather's warming up, and so they're cold-blooded. They are, what is it, poikilotherms. Yeah, poikilotherms. And so, with every 10 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, a cold-blooded animal's metabolism doubles. And so they're like really getting worked up out there, and they're like swimming up to the surface. Usually they stay down at the bottom and eat derbis and stuff, but now they're like swimming up to the top and everything. It's just really exciting. And before I get started on these questions, um, I should say that I actually had to do homework on this one. I had to actually study something on this. Um, Usually I don't. I just like to just answer these off the top of my head, without having to like look in books or anything. And it makes for easy answers because, somebody asked me, what was Linus Pauling's attitude towards Buddhism? I can just say, I don't know, and then move on to the next question. But I actually had to read a few texts just to refresh my memory about what they say, just so I can comment on them. So anyway, first question is from the Arya Swasti Project. And the Arya Swasti Project says, Greetings, Panyo. I've heard you mention, and I agree, that hardship can prompt deeper spiritual understanding. A lot of other schools of thought rely on prayer, magic, causing changes, etc., since they might just be making more issues for themselves, especially if they have no self-awareness or spiritual awareness. If hard times can give us deeper understanding, why wouldn't we want all the hard times we could endure? On that note, why would we want to wish hard times on an enemy, since it would just make them more enlightened? If anything, we should never shirk our karma and never wish ill will on anyone. What are your thoughts on this? Addendum, if I were to be honest, the worst times of my life brought the deepest understanding and growth, although some of those I would never ever want to experience again. Well, that's a good question. And there's a lot I could say about this. For one thing, even though suffering can cause people to reach out to something higher, or if you get into a situation that's so bad that your habitual way of dealing with life just doesn't work anymore, you can have a kind of breakdown, and then you become very open to new ideas. And some people have capitalized on this, like Chinese thought reform, like the brainwashing camps and all that. They were based on that, where they would cause a person to just have a breakdown just through the hardships they're undergoing. And then because their habitual way of dealing with life wasn't working anymore, then you've got the commissar or whoever just like programs them to be a good communist. And there's a lot of that, like military basic training. Some spiritual retreats work this way, where you just get into like a crisis, and then suddenly all these habits that you've been clinging to without even meaning to cling to them, you can let go of them more easily and accept different things. But it doesn't always work that way. Some people just have a breakdown and just stay broken down. But let's see here. I gotta answer this question. So let's see, if hard times can give us deeper understanding, why wouldn't we want all the hard times we can endure? Well, if you get too many hard times, I mean, really, it can just break you. And this is like the difference between Buddhism and certain other ascetic schools of philosophy or schools of spirituality in ancient times, like the Jains or like the Ajivakas, who they were literally torturing themselves. They were trying to accelerate the burning off of karma. But the middle path in Buddhism is, it's the middle path between, at least one of the middle paths in Buddhism is the middle path between self-indulgence and self-torture. So you're not trying to avoid unpleasant things necessarily. You're not seeking them out either. You're just living your life as wisely, as peacefully, as non-harmfully as you can. And then whatever comes at you through the power of your own karma, you deal with it. And that's probably the wisest way of going about it. Like if you just steadfastly avoid any kind of anything that makes you uncomfortable, then you're not going to make much progress. On the other hand, if you're just diving into it, then I mean you might be just making trouble. And I mean you might just dive into too much for you to deal with. But if you just let it happen naturally, which it always does, I mean there's no escape from it, then that's probably the wisest way of going about it. So let's see here. We should never shirk our karma, never wish ill will on anyone. Yeah, well, usually if you're wanting bad things to happen to somebody and bad things do happen to somebody, then, I mean, most people, if they just have something bad happen to them, it doesn't cause them to have any kind of spiritual awakening. But it can happen. Like, I knew this woman who got cancer, and she was just sort of like just really like a self-oriented normie, just kind of living at the surface. And then she got cancer, and it was, she had to have some of her body parts removed and so forth, and she thought she might die, and it really caused her to reevaluate her existence, and she became a deeper and better person after that. So that can happen too. Let's see. But yeah, it's true with me also. I mean, the two main growth spurts of like spiritual like awakening happen as a result of just being in a state of real crisis, just practically hitting rock bottom. And then, like I said, when you hit one of these crises, a crisis point, it really can just cause you to let go of these habits that you've been clinging to consciously or subconsciously for years and years and years, and reach out for something else. And I think Ram Dass said a long time ago, and it haunted me for many years, in one of his books, he said that absolute despair is a prerequisite to significant spiritual growth. And I always hoped that he was wrong, but my own experience in life does seem to bear it out to some degree. So, let's see. Oh, there's another part here. Wait, no, that's the next question. Never mind. Okay, so that's what I have to say about that. It's best not to seek out bad things to happen to you, not to just avoid them at all costs. Just live your life as wisely as you can, and whatever the universe throws at you, you deal with it as wisely as you can. So I'll just move on to the next question. On the topic of liminality, and then in parentheses he says naughty discussion on Hansen. And then he says, the concept itself is fascinating, I agree, and if one is liminal, wouldn't they have to be in the correct spot of truth at all times, since nothing is certain and nothing is concrete, even concrete? Would you say that if Buddhism itself is an explanation or expression of liminality? Well, I don't fully understand all this question. With the regard to liminality, the Arya Swasti project, I think partly, maybe mainly because I was talking a lot about a book by George Hansen called The Trickster and the Paranormal, which is I consider to be one of the most important books I've ever read. It'd be like definitely probably in the top 10 of the most important books I've ever read, just with regard to like causing a significant paradigm shift, a significant change in the way you understand reality. And in the book, he's talking about how liminality, how like the breakdown of order and regularity causes what is called liminality, which means like you're reaching a kind of threshold, or it's sort of an intermediate state between two concretes. You're kind of in this vague zone, and that causes a certain uncertainty and chaos to manifest in the world. And he mentions in his book about how witches, for example, in order to do magic, they actually create some of this chaos. They'll violate taboos, they'll violate societal norms, which kind of causes a breakdown of order and regularity, which then allows chaos to come through the weak spots that they have created. So, the question here is: would you say that Buddhism itself is an explanation or expression of liminality. Well, to some degree, Buddhism does create liminality. And like, just for example, like a monk, a renunciant, is just going against all the social norms. Well, not maybe not all of them, but he is violating social norms. He's just becoming a radical homeless wanderer. No family, no money, and that in itself is creating a kind of liminality. And he's just going, like in the Buddhist time especially, a Buddhist renunciate would just go out and live alone in a forest. And I mean, that can create some liminality too. But I mean, just the middle path, I was talking about the middle path just a few minutes ago, where it's in between the extremes. I mean, it's not just with regard to the middle path between um, self-indulgence and self-torture. It's the middle path between just about anything, is and isn't. It's just this total liminal path, really, and it allows for more opportunities, spiritual opportunities. But then also, there is one statement in The Trickster and the Paranormal that really intrigued me, and he's talking about how meditation is liminal because you're observing your own mind, and that creates like self-referential short circuit. Like being self-referential is liminal. It causes paradox. Like the reason why you can make a statement that is neither true nor false is if the statement is itself self-referential. Like, this statement is false. It's referring to itself, and thus it can create this paradox where the statement itself can be neither true nor false. And when you're meditating, you're doing that at a larger scale. The mind is observing itself as becoming self-referential, and then all kinds of weird things can happen, and people do have weird experiences through meditation. Some people acquire psychic powers through meditation and so forth. So Buddhism does have built into it a kind of liminality. So yeah. So I'll just move on to the Arya Swasti Project's next question. Addendum to liminality. Just playing with the idea here. I don't expect a deep response, but it occurred to me and thought it was interesting. Would you say that all or nothing thinking, or objective thinking in any case, is never certain? It couldn't be never, because that in itself would be all or nothing. And this also, this Q&A has a number of questions that I do not fully grasp the meaning of the question. And this is one of those questions. Would you say that all or nothing thinking or objective thinking in any case is never certain? Well, the person who thinks in all or nothing terms, yeah, they're certain pretty much all the time, unless they just honestly admit that they don't know something and just avoid the yes or no, the is or isn't. But in reality, any statement you make about the outside world is never certain. Like Spinoza and David Hume in the West both were made, I mean, they made the statement, I think in Hume's case it was called Hume's fork, where the only certainty you can have is regard to something that's completely self-contained, something completely contained within your own mind. So some kind of logical statement, for example, you might have worked out some laws of geometry or something, but so I mean the entire thing is in your head, so that can be certain. But with regard to anything in the outside world, there's always going to be uncertainty because you can't be sure that you're not hallucinating, that you're not insane in some respect. And in Buddhism, anyone who isn't fully enlightened is considered to be insane. So, yeah. So I'm not exactly sure what the main point of this question is, though. Would you say that all or nothing thinking or objective thinking in any case is never certain? Yeah, well, I guess that's my best answer because I really do not fully understand the implications of this question. So we'll just move on to the Arya Swasti Project's next question. And it says, we've seen the ring and heard the announcement, but when do we get to see a picture of your girl? When do we get to see the bride-to-be? Once again, congratulations. Maybe show your favorite pic of you two together and then in parentheses he has respectfully submitted. Well, this question was asked on the Discord server, and my sweetheart does have a picture of at least 1/3 of her face as her avatar on Discord. So you get to see a picture of her there, or at least a picture of some of her. But with regard to my favorite picture of both of us, we don't really have a whole lot of pictures of both of us together. Because either you got to do the selfie, like reaching out, or else you have to ask somebody else to take the picture. But we did have a picture taken of us when we were in, like, at Lake Erie. There's this famous lighthouse there that was built in the early 1800s, I think. And I just happen to have it right here. Let's see. So cover up this part because that's not the picture in question. But there we are. That's us sitting underneath this lighthouse at Lake Erie when we were on vacation. So there you go. There she is in all her loveliness. So we'll just move on to the next question. Arya Swasti Project says, I'm really interested in this liminality concept. Yeah, I got him intrigued with this book, I think. Do you think you could make a suggestion or two of liminal trickster behavior that would lead to true paranormal experiences? Well, I already mentioned just the self-referential aspect of meditation. Also, I mentioned that certain people, like witches, tend to just deliberately violate taboos and social norms to create liminality through which this like juju, this paranormality can arise. And I refuse to say paranormalcy except in quotation marks right now. So he also points out in the book that a lot of psychics tend to be deviants in a certain way, and I'm not saying deviance in like a negative, like a pervert kind of, in that kind of way, but they deviate from just the societal norm. And so he points out that many famous psychics or magicians, like Aleister Crowley, they were homosexual or bisexual, or they had some other kind of sexual kink that kind of generated liminality. But I'm not suggesting the Arya Swasti Project become gay. But there are ways of going about it, and any kind of system will have pretty much built into the system any like ways of creating liminality, which then sort of creates like a portal or a threshold through which like forces beyond this version of reality can bleed through into our reality. So yeah, I would suggest though you don't do anything really wildly. Like certain taboos are there for good reasons. Don't do incest, that kind of a thing. But I mean, what works for you? I mean, you might do some introspection and find out what kind of violation of norms would work best for you. Like for a monk, celibacy itself is kind of a violation of nature, sort of like a crime against nature almost. So I'll just move on to the Arya Swasti Project's next and last question, which he asked just under the wire. See, the way I make this list is it's pretty much in chronological order. The first person to ask a question gets to be at the top of the list. Last person to ask a question usually is at the bottom. But if they've already asked a question earlier, then all their questions are in a row. So the Arya Swasti Project asked the first and possibly last question, but they're all here at the beginning. And he says, after researching Neem Karoli Baba, after hearing you speak of him, I found this quote, "It is very difficult to know exactly what good should come out of a particular situation. To attempt to manipulate circumstances so your idea of good can come about is to let the ego play God, and that, as you know, can and does backfire," unquote. However, he and many others are known to influence circumstances. So with that being said, I'm confident that changes can be made beyond or outside of normal, i.e. repetitious movement of thought, prayer, ceremony, or even trickery. So how do we know when to initiate changes to a situation or just take our licks? Well, you just have to rely upon your own wisdom, your own intuition, your own rationality to know if it's, it's sort of like the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, which I don't fully remember, but it's like, give me the wisdom to know, what I can change and what I can't change. Give me the wisdom to accept what I can't change and to be able to change what I can change for the better, kind of a thing. With regard to Neem Karoli Baba, he doesn't necessarily play by his own rules because according to Ram Dass, I mean, there was really nobody there. He really didn't have, if he apparently had an ego, but I mean, he was no longer identified with it. It was just nature taking its course. So he told lies, even though he told other people it's very serious. You don't tell lies. That's a very bad thing to do. But I mean, he was just kind of beyond, the rules of how to get enlightened or how to how to meet God because he already met him apparently. Um, but that's sort of opening the door to some scandalous ideas. So let's see here. Common changes can be made beyond. Yeah, I mean, obviously, sometimes you need to make changes. I mean, you can't be totally passive. Sometimes you have to be an active agent in this world. You get a flat tire on the highway. I mean, you got to do something about it. You don't just sit there with your on the side of the road with a flat tire. I mean, obviously, you have to do something about it. So you just accept the situation as well as you can and do what you think is best. So, but it is true. Sometimes if you try to improve a situation, it just makes things worse. That is true, but you have to use your own wisdom and intuition and rationality to some degree and just do the best you can. And we all make mistakes, but if your heart is in the right place, you'll probably do the right thing more often than not. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Austin. And Austin says, can dialectical materialism be looked at through a karmic lens? Well, anything volitional can be looked at through a karmic lens. I'm not exactly sure what he means. This is another one of those questions that I do not fully grasp because there's different ways of interpreting it. Um, Dialectical materialism, for those of you who are innocent of Marxism, bless your hearts, um, yeah, it's pretty much what Marxism is based on. It's a kind of, I mean, it's ultimately goes back to Hegel with his dialectic, except Marx was certainly not an idealist like Hegel was. He was a materialist, pretty much a spiritually comatose materialist. But I mean, would you refer to just the manifestation of dialectical materialism in this world? I mean, that's our karma. That would be looking at it through a karmic lens. If we didn't have the karma to experience it, we wouldn't be experiencing it. If we didn't have the karma to hear about it, we wouldn't hear about it. So there's that. Or you can refer to it as, I mean, even though Marx himself apparently was of the idea that, I mean, there's hardly any free will, maybe none, that we're just a product of our culture, our economic system, because that's pretty much what Marxism is based on. You want everyone to be happy, you got to change the economic system, and you want people to think the right thoughts. You got to change the system. It's coming from outside. Just what we are is not generated from within. It's just imposed upon us from society. Is largely what Marx was teaching, as far as I can understand Marx. I mean, he's boring as hell, and I'm not a Marxist, so I'm no authority on this. But yeah, I mean, if you want to become a Marxist, that is your volitional choice, I assume, and that would be karmic too. And it's really not good karma. I mean, like Marxist societies do not end well. Just history has shown we've got over a century now of stagnant and failed economies and totalitarianism and genocide. And that's all, I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, that's all karmic. Whatever is the result, I mean, whatever is a volitional action is karma. And that causes the fruition in with regard to what is happening back to the person who made those volitional choices. So, yeah, I guess dialectical materialism can be looked at through a karmic lens. Anything can be looked at through a karmic lens in one way or another, but I'm really not sure exactly what he had in mind here. So I'll just move on to Austin's next question. Congratulations, Punyo Boss. I'm so happy to hear of your engagement. Please tell us how you propose. That's kind of a personal question, isn't it? Sakes. I mean, it was, I got her a ring and I was going to take the day off, and it was on her birthday. The day I proposed, I was intending to propose to her on her birthday, which, I mean, you could look at that cynically. It's like, I could just give her the ring as a birthday present, thereby saving me the effort of having to get her another birthday present. Although I did get her another birthday present, it came in the mail and she opened it long before her birthday, so that kind of wrecked that too. So anyway, sometimes she'd just be in this blah kind of mood and just, you shouldn't take the day off on my birthday, just keep working. It doesn't matter. I don't want to do anything on my birthday. She's really not a birthday oriented person. I think most women above the age of 20 tend to kind of downplay birthdays anyway. And so I'm just getting kind of borderline panicky, definitely concerned about how I don't want her to be all depressed on her on her birthday, because that's the day I want to propose to her. But yeah, it worked out fine. She was in a good mood. Somehow I managed to help her be in a happy mood by the time she was opening her presents in the afternoon. And one of the main present was this diamond ring that I got for her. And she liked it a lot. She says it's the nicest ring she's ever had. So, and then I asked her to marry me. And I didn't get down on one knee until I mean, I've never done this before, I didn't know if people really are supposed to get down on one knee. But then she said, um, it was her understanding that I should get down on one knee and put the ring onto her finger. So I did that. And I asked her if she'd marry me. And she said, and I quote, "Of course." So it all worked out well. So I'll just move on to the next question from Austin here. Austin asks personal questions sometimes. Let's see. But this one is more about him than about me, so there is that. I feel like I have terrible karma, especially at this moment in my life. If I do a lot of good things, will my bad karma get weighed out by the good karma? And yeah, there is a sutta, and I've mentioned this before on Q&As, I'm pretty sure, that there is a sutta where the Buddha compares a person's bad karma to a handful of salt. And if you pour the handful of salt into a cup of water, it's so salty that you can't drink the water. But if you pour that same handful of salt into a pool of water and it dissolves, then you hardly notice the salt at all, because you've dissolved it into a larger amount of water, much larger. And he compares that with, doing good and doing bad. If you've got a lot of bad karma and not a whole lot of good karma, which is the water, then yeah, it's going to be predominantly bad. But if you do as much good as you can, earn enough merit, then that dilutes down the bad. I mean, it's still the same amount, more or less, but at least it's mitigated. And I've been that way in my life. Whenever I have something really bad happen to me, something good tends to happen to mitigate it. So I think I do have a fair amount of good karma in my life. It's like, for example, the first two times I got malaria in Burma. I mean, getting malaria is not good. It's really icky. And it's always the worst kind. It's falciparum, the kind that kills people. And I was living in a remote area with no car both times. And both times somebody just shows up in a Jeep that day, and they're able to just haul me into the Jeep and take me to a doctor. That was the two times I was hospitalized. Another time, um, I used to keep biting into rocks in my food. In Burma, they thresh the rice and they thresh their beans and so forth on the ground, and little brown rocks get mixed in with the beans, little white rocks get mixed in with the rice, and you bite into rocks in your food. It's not good. And sometimes I'd bite into a rock in my food, and it'd be this crack, and it would hurt, and I'd be concerned. I'd be reaching around in my mouth with my finger to see if I broke a tooth or knocked a filling out or something. And through good karma, I suppose, in part at least, I never broke a tooth when I was out in the sticks, except later one time I did. But at that time, I'd been in Burma for a few to several years, and it kept happening. I'd bite into the rock, and then finally, I happened to be in Rangoon attending to visa issues or something. So I was in a relatively rich neighborhood of Rangoon, and a servant girl, I went for alms. A servant girl gave me some bean curry that had a little brown rock concealed in it, and I bite into that rock and I broke 3 teeth. It just came in like 2 bottom teeth and 1 upper tooth, and it's like just right in between the space between the teeth. Like, so it got 3 all at the same time. But as it turned out, through the mitigating circumstances, the servant girl happened to be the servant girl of the dean and rector of the Rangoon Dental College. And he was a dentist, and he was like right across the street. So I just went right across the street. He fixed my teeth for free, became my dentist for free after that while I was living in Burma. And I had the same dentist as the dictator because he was the #1 dentist in the entire country. So if you do a lot of merit, then at least you're going to get mitigating circumstances. It's not going to be just like a nightmarish hellscape. And I would say to Austin here that, I mean, you don't have all bad karma, obviously, because at least you've had the good fortune of hearing about Dhamma. You're obviously earning merit through seeking the truth and trying to know reality and so forth. So that's very big good karma. Just to be like spiritually searching in a more or less wise way too, then yeah, that's about some of the best karma you can get. And I think it's mostly Mahayana though. I think it's the Diamond Cutter Sutra that says that what is it? Yeah, that just memorizing one verse from the sutra and like trying to understand it and maybe sharing it with others is better karma than just giving all of your money to buy clothing and food and medicine for needy people, because it's sort of a transcendental kind of merit that you're earning. So yeah, the answer to this, the long answer to the short question is definitely it mitigates the bad karma and dilutes it down if you make a lot of good karma. So just help others. Instead of squishing the spider, just catch it and let it go with a blessing in your heart, that kind of a thing. And don't go around bragging about it either. Just keep it secret. That's one thing I really like from biblical Christianity, is the idea that when you do good, don't broadcast it to other people. Don't brag about it. Just be quiet about it. If you're fasting, just pretend like you're not fasting. I mean, if somebody asks you, you don't lie, but still, you don't just advertise it to everybody. So we'll just move on to the next question from Austin here. How do Buddhists cast away evil spirits? Well, the standard way of casting away evil spirits for Theravada Buddhism, different kinds of Buddhism will have different ways. I'm sure the Tibetans have like various strange ways of dealing with evil spirits. But in Theravada Buddhism, the one main way of casting away evil spirits is sending metta, like reciting the Metta Sutta. The whole Metta Sutta, the origin story, which may be just apocrypha, but the origin story to the Metta Sutta of the Sutta Nipata, which is one of the best known paritas or protection chants in Theravada Buddhism. I mean, if a Buddhist, if they know how to chant one sutta, it's usually the Metta Sutta. And according to the story, there was a bunch of monks were meditating in this forest, and because of their virtue, it was sort of robbing the terrestrial deities in the area, like tree spirits and so forth. It was robbing them of their ability to fly up into their tree, so they're like stuck on the ground. They're bothered by this. They resent these monks living there. And so they start like harassing the monks by essentially like haunting them. They're presenting headless bodies and bodiless heads, and weird moaning sounds and so forth. And so they're disturbing the monks' meditation, hoping that the monks will just clear out. So the monks eventually do clear out, but they go to the Buddha and they tell him what happened. And he said, just beam metta at them, and he taught them the Metta Sutta to chant as a way of just sort of emanating loving kindness or friendliness, friendly feeling, maybe spiritual love to these beings. And it it worked. And so the beings just stopped causing problems, and they got along fine after that. And that really is the standard way. Like demonic possession, you just chant the Metta Sutta, or just beam love at these beings, or just hauntings, that kind of a thing. And it apparently does work. It's like the best way of defeating an enemy is to turn them into a friend. And some hauntings apparently are, you've got these unhappy beings that, they want something. They're dissatisfied. They're not really trying to be evil or anything. They're just suffering. They're in a lower realm than the human realm, and just, sending love to them can uplift them enough that they can leave. But I can't really entirely vouch for the 100% effectiveness of this method, but that is the standard method in Theravada Buddhism of dealing with evil spirits and enemies too. Just beam love at them, which I was really unpalatable to a lot of people. I knew this school teacher in Burma who was really, I mean, she was like a female Burmese version of the Apache war chief Geronimo. She looked like him too. And she would brag to me sometimes about how she recites the Metta Sutta every morning and sends metta to all beings. But I mean, she was really like a Hatfield or a McCoy, because she was always feuding with some neighbor or other. And she was feuding with this one neighbor in particular. And I pointed out to her, I mean, if you're sending metta to all beings, you're also sending metta to this guy that you've been fighting with. And she all of a sudden just flares up and says, "No, not him." And so you got to I mean, most people just can't. It's like in Christianity too. Love your enemies, bless those that curse you. How many Christians actually do that? There are some. I admit that there are some, but they're probably not the majority of Christians. It's not easy. It goes against human nature, and it's sort of counterintuitive. If you got a bad person or some malevolent being causing trouble for you, that you want to return evil for evil, that returning good for evil just seems like you're just strengthening them. But it doesn't really work that way, because as a general rule, any malevolent being, anyone who is bad, is unhappy. Anyone who's like just a hateful, violent, just making trouble for people on purpose, they're not a happy person. And so by helping them to be happier, like beaming love at them, um, it kind of uplifts them, and it makes them less willing to mess with people, because they're messing with people because they're so unhappy. They want to see other people unhappy too, or something along those lines. So I'll just move on to the next question from Austin, which is, please tell me how Buddhist prayer works. How does it differ from Christian prayer? Why do Buddhists pray if there is no God to pray to? Well, prayer really is discouraged in Theravada Buddhism. In the Pali text, the Buddha kind of makes fun of praying. It's like he's saying that a person who's praying is like a person standing on one side of a river, just praying to the other side to come over to this side so he doesn't have to cross it. And so prayer really is not like Orthodox Buddhism. I mean, later on, when Buddhism became like more mainstream, more normies were getting interested, more lay people were becoming Buddhist. They want to pray, and so they pray to the Buddha. And then you get like Pure Land stuff, where it's almost, it's heavily based on praying to some cosmic Buddha up in heaven somewhere, or in some Pure Land to the west somewhere, or whatever. But in Orthodox Theravada, it's more meditation than prayer. Prayer is, you're asking for favors for some, you're asking for help, and you just have to do it yourself. I mean, this self-reliance is heavily stressed in Theravada Buddhism. So some Buddhists do pray to the Buddha, and like I think I was talked about this in the last Q&A, where I knew this village doctor who was one of the few people in the area who spoke English, and we talked sometimes, and he told me that he prayed to the Buddha, and I asked him, like, I mean, the Buddha no longer exists in this world. He no longer exists in any world. Why would you pray to him? Why would you pray to someone who doesn't exist? And he was saying, well, the Buddha could see into the future, and then he could see me praying to him, and then maybe he would, send metta or help in some way. So you can justify it, but really you gotta kind of go your own route. And meditation is definitely much more encouraged in Theravada Buddhism than prayer, because prayer is you're essentially asking for something, whereas with meditation you're just trying to understand your own mind so that you can cure yourself of your own insanity, so to speak. So I think I'll just move on to the next question. This is from SS. And SS says, what is the best translation of the Pali Canon? I read Thanissaro Bhikkhus by default because they are easily found in one place and for free. Well, with regard to a translation of the entire Pali Canon in the Burmese recension of it is 40 volumes. It's, like the Encyclopedia Britannica, including the knowledge in brief. It's a lot. And so I don't know of one person who has translated the entire thing. Usually you have people translating certain texts, and certain translations of certain texts are better than other translations of certain texts. And so yeah, there's not just, a translation of the Pali Canon. You're more likely to find a translation of the Majjhima Nikaya, a translation of the Vinaya, a translation of the Samyutta Nikaya, a translation of the Sutta Nipata, lots of translations of the Dhammapada, and then you just try to find a good translation of that particular text. And probably the two best translators of Pali into English nowadays would be Bhikkhu Bodhi, despite his inane politics. He's a good translator because he's good. He understands the Pali language. He has at least a superficial familiarity with a lot of the things that are being discussed. Just the philosophy part, he understands that well. With regard to the meditation stuff, I've heard that he doesn't meditate much, if at all. So, with regard to that, he knows the theory that he's read in books and heard from other people, but he's not really he's not rendering the instructions guided much by his own experience, apparently. Ajahn Thanissaro, that SS mentions here, he also is a good translator. He's kind of self-indulgent. He doesn't really follow the standard translations or the renderings of certain Pali words, and his translations of poetry are so idiosyncratic and self-indulgent that I get embarrassed sometimes. It's like a good translator should be as invisible as possible. A good translator should make it so that you're reading in English as though you're reading the Pali. It should be as close to an effect on you as if you were just fluent in Pali and reading the Pali itself. And so it's best just to be invisible. But some of Ajahn Thanissaro's translations, he might as well just include every few lines. Look at me, here I am, Ajahn Thanissaro, translating this. So, I knocked the picture over. Excuse me. Don't want it lying there on the floor face down. So, Nyanamoli, the deceased Nyanamoli, not the new famous Nyanamoli. It's like the old famous Nyanamoli. He was an excellent translator. He was kind of idiosyncratic too, in that he tried very hard to use one word in English for the one word in Pali. And sometimes one word in Pali can have lots of meanings, like Dhamma. It can have lots of different meanings, and he would just come up with the word like idea, and you just like whenever Dhamma appeared, regardless of the context, he'd try to use the same word. Or like Brahma, I think he used divine or divinity, something along those lines. So Brahmins were called divines, and yeah, it didn't work out very well. But he was really a brilliant translator. There are good translators. K.R. Norman is really, I mean, he understands the Pali really well, although he really is not interested in the philosophy or what it's saying. So any kind of deep philosophical stuff or mystical stuff, he just doesn't get. Um, so yeah, you just have to just find good translators. When in doubt, I mean, Bhikkhu Bodhi and Ajahn Tanisaro are good translators. So um, the Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of the Majjhima Nikaya is really good, probably the best, because it's based on Ajahn or Venerable Nyanamoli that I just mentioned, and Bhikkhu Bodhi just kind of fixed it up a little bit, where he's just taking the weird idiosyncratic renderings and just switching it over to more mainstream standard. I mean, it is good to kind of have um, just kind of follow the tradition with regard to translating. You know, like metta is loving kindness, or satipatthana is, you know, the foundations of mindfulness. Um, at least you know what the Pali term is when you see the English term. But if you're using like a radically different term, like let's see, what did Ajahn Tanisaro use for the four foundations of mindfulness, or um, it's like frames of reference or something, so that unless you're familiar with what he translates as what, you can really get confused because you're really not sure what the Pali term is. But if you're completely innocent of Pali terminology, then it maybe doesn't matter all that much. So I think I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Librarian Crazy. And Librarian Crazy says, Bante, I watched 2 or 3 of your Q&As and read some of your blogs. You mentioned you think John of the Cross is probably an enlightened guy. What's the reason for this? What are traits that make him seem like he is one of enlightened beings? Yeah, I have mentioned that St. John of the Cross, who was a discalced Carmelite mystic in the Roman Catholic Church, he lived in Spain in the 1500s. I think there's a chance that he may have been fully enlightened, because the way he describes practice and the fruits of practice come very close to what Theravada Buddhism describes as practice and the fruits of practice. And I mean, it's strange that um, he's the mystical doctor of the Catholic Church. So anything that St. John of the Cross says about mysticism is just dogma for the Catholic Church. So I mean, he was being persecuted by not only by the Inquisition, but he was being persecuted by the unreformed Carmelites. It was really strange. There's all this politics going on, and he was getting ready to just go to Mexico and become a missionary. I almost said a mercenary. Just become a missionary in Mexico right before he died, because it was just too much. It was just all this politics and persecution and this troublemaking and stuff going on in the Catholic Church at the time. Um, but yeah, he talks about like the 3 stages of progress in spirituality, which is you got the beginner, the adept, and the perfect, and that pretty much fits in with what Theravada Buddhism refers to as the Putujana, the common person, the Seka, the one in training, and the Aseka, the one no longer in training. And the Aseka is perfect, or he's fully enlightened. And so he's got the same practices of like mindfulness and like jhana, like what they're calling high contemplation. I mean, it's got to be at least second jhana, and he was just based upon his ways of talking about it through experience with like a voice of authority. It's pretty obvious that he was a master of jhana. And so it's just the overlap, just the striking similarity of his descriptions of, enlightenment and so forth. Like he's saying that an enlightened being, like someone who has reached the stage of perfection, which I mean, I was amazed when I read this, because according to the Bible, I mean, even Jesus denies being good. Only God is good, that nobody is worthy, everyone is a sinner. And here's St. John of the Cross talking about becoming God through participation. And subsequently, I've heard that in Greek Orthodox mysticism, they also teach the same thing, that you can become God through participation. You mortify your own self-will, your own preferences and so forth, and you just empty yourself out, and then you become like a puppet of God. You're no longer moved by your own self-will, your own human will. You're moved by the will of God. And that's becoming God through participation. You're becoming, God's hand puppet or whatever. And that also closely resembles Theravada Buddhism, because in Theravada Buddhism, an arahant has no will. He has no volition. He's no longer making karma. And so again, it's these continual overlaps where you get to this really advanced level of spirituality, and it's just explaining pretty much the same things, but within a different, like a religious context, like a different cultural conditioning. You're trying to explain the same things, but from two different cultural conditionings, which make some of the theory different, even though the practices and the results are essentially the same. So yeah, I would say St. John of the Cross. He may have been wiser than the founder of his religion, as far as I know. I think Meister Eckhart also may have. I mean, he was a very advanced mystic. He also may have been very advanced spiritually, and possibly an arahant, like a Christian arahant. But I don't know enough about Meister Eckhart. I've read the complete works of St. John of the Cross, so I'm pretty familiar with what he was saying. So I'll just move on to Librarian Crazy's next question, which is, a lot of Thai monks are believed by their loyal followers as an arahant, like Ajahn Mahabua. I watched some of his Dhamma talks where he gave discourses while chewing betel nuts and spit in buckets. Doesn't seem like a very admirable conduct for a normal person, let alone arahant, in my humble opinion. What do you think about this? Well, I remember one time there was this Texan hermit who lived in a big hollow tree who explained to me that when a Burmese person or an Asian Buddhist says that a certain Ajahn or Sayadaw is an Arahant, all that means is that they are their devotee. That's just the way it is. And one time I went to see this Sayadaw who was considered to be an Arahant. I've met a few monks who are considered to be Arahants. And this one in particular, his name was Mahabodhi Ain Sayadaw or something. And on the way there, I asked the driver, who was one of his devotees, "Are you sure he's enlightened?" And he's like, "Hey Johnny, I'm sure. He's enlightened." How they would possibly know? I mean, they couldn't possibly know, but they're sure. And the Burmese, in particular, tend to be that way. They're sure, even if they don't have a clue, really. Is it going to rain next Wednesday? Yep, it's going to rain. And they don't know. They're just, for some reason, it's just the way their mind works. They're not really sure. They're not comfortable with ambiguity. They want a yes or no. But anyway, this Mahabodhi Ain Sayadaw, or it was something along those lines. I went to see him, and it was just like a circus at his monastery. There was all these like alchemists and stuff walking. All these statues and pagodas being built everywhere. It was pretty much like a festival there every day, and everyone's like standing around waiting for the Arahant Sayadaw to come out and eat his meal. He finally comes out like 11:45, which is, you got 15 minutes to eat your meal before you're breaking the rules. And he comes out and he sits in this pavilion. One of the first things he does, he just like blows his nose into his hand and then just wipes the snot on the wall. And this is an Arahant, supposedly. So yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, you pretty much have to be enlightened to know if somebody else is enlightened. But I mean, if you see somebody that's just like, screaming in the face of an old lady and kicking her or something, that's a pretty good indication that he's not enlightened. But Ajahn Mahabua didn't scream in the faces of old ladies and kick them, as far as I know. He did write a really bizarre biography of his teacher, Ajahn Mun, that you wonder how an extremely wise person can come up with this. But again, it's just traditional. There's all these talks about, the fault-finding cobra dragon and the ogre that Ajahn Mun had to deal with out in the woods, and just on and on and on. Just whole multitudes of like dead Buddhas and their enlightened disciples that are coming back to the earth somehow after transcending samsara, just to come and hang out with Ajahn Mun and so forth. Um, yeah, I'm pretty skeptical with regard to that sort of thing, I have to admit. Chewing betel nuts and spitting it into a spittoon, spitting the betel spit into a spittoon. I mean, that's not too bad. There have been like very advanced Hindu swamis that smoke cigarettes. Ajahn Mun himself was a chain smoker, or so I've been told, which would make an arahant literally a drug addict. But maybe, I mean, at least it's not like fentanyl or something. I mean, tobacco really isn't that horrible. It's not like he's getting drunk, I suppose. So, yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, with regard to enlightened beings, you can only guess. You just make your best guess. Um, but I would say that Ajahn Mahabua, at the very least, he's much more advanced than the average person, even if he wasn't like fully enlightened, even if that even means anything within a samsaric context. Because I'm thinking that within the context of samsara, the thinking mind and everything, a fully enlightened being really doesn't mean anything, because any kind of meaning would make them part of, like it would sort of bring them back into samsara or something. It's yeah, I mean, it may be it's sort of like a paradox where within a samsaric context, just enlightenment is just impossible. So they have to transcend samsara, and even though their body and their mind, to some degree, is still here in this world, they're not identified with it. They're sort of beyond. So it's really hard to say. Like Neem Karoli Baba that I mentioned, I think he may have been fully enlightened, but he was a rascal. I mean, he did not behave the way the stereotypical saint like Ramana Maharshi behaved. But he was extremely advanced, and I've got no doubt about that. So I think I'll just move on to Librarian Crazy's next question here. What constitutes as sexual misconduct in Buddhism? The rules in the suttas seem pretty abstract. Does having premarital sex with a girlfriend count as misconduct? Well, I'll answer this last part first. Does having premarital sex with a girlfriend count as misconduct? Not necessarily. You don't have to be married in order to avoid sexual misconduct. I mean, if two people love each other and they're faithful to each other, they're pretty much married already. I mean, just having a ceremony, and getting like this piece of paper, the marriage license or whatever, that really doesn't change all that much. The ring on the finger doesn't make you, like a loving, faithful couple. But you would have to, you have to be faithful to each other. But getting back to the first question here, what constitutes a sexual misconduct in Buddhism? I've answered this question in previous Q&A, at least one, and somewhere, I don't remember exactly where it is, there's just a list of women that a man is not supposed to have sexual relations with. And all of the list, I think it's 10, but all of them are women that are already like under the guardianship or protection of another man. So it's like another man's wife, obviously, a woman who is betrothed, she's engaged, she's a woman who still lives with her parents, so she's under the protection of her father or her guardian, a woman who's under the protection of a guardian, like another man's slave girl, a woman who is a prisoner who's under the guardianship of the prison guards, or the what do you call him, the main guy at the prison. The word's escaping me. I have never been to prison, so so that's kind of like the commentarial interpretation, I'm pretty sure, of sexual misconduct. But I mean, it would also include like having sex with a prostitute. She's under the protection of her pimp or whatever. But even a free agent prostitute would be sexual misconduct. If you're having just promiscuous sex with people you don't care about, people that don't care about you, that would qualify as sexual misconduct. So sexual intercourse that isn't sexual misconduct would be essentially two people, preferably who love each other, or at least they have like this sense of duty. They have this bond, and they're not messing around with other people on the side. They're just with each other, and they're monogamous essentially. So that would not be sexual misconduct if it fit that. So you don't have to be married, but at least you have to be, you know, in a stable, faithful pair bond with another person. So I'll just move on with Librarian Crazy's next and last question here. And he says, I got a chuckle when you said you smash those flies and feed them to the ants. Did you have to do penance after doing it? As a layperson now, do you still follow the 5 precepts? The no killing insects part is probably the hardest precept to follow for me. Well, technically I wasn't feeding ants, I was feeding ant lions. And if you never lived in like a dry, deserty place, an ant lion, it's a kind of insect larva or nymph that lives in the sand, and it makes this funnel-shaped pit. And anything that falls into the pit, it like flings sand at them, mostly ants, until they fall down to the bottom, and it grabs them in its jaws and eats them. But that's kind of irrelevant here. Do you have to do penance after killing an insect? No. You have to make confession. So it's a pachidya offense. To kill an animal is a pachidya offense. And so you just make confession, and that kind of, I mean, you still got the karma, but at least from the ecclesiastical point of view, you're clear. You're in good standing. You confess the offense. You promise to do better in future, that you restrain yourself in future, and so that's fine. And for those of you that didn't see the previous Q&A where I was talking about this, I mean, it's ironic that when I was trying to be as serious and strict of a monk as possible, I was living out in this big forest in tropical Asia with no mosquito net and just out there in the open. And mosquitoes, I mean, within reason, I could just sit there and be bitten by mosquitoes. And there were times when there'd be like 6 of them biting me at the same time. But there were these horse flies and sand flies that would come and start. I mean, the sand flies would just come in swarms. And it was scary because they bite hard. It hurts. And I just could not sit there and just be eaten alive by these things. And so I just started flailing back at them. And I got pretty good at slapping them with my sweat wiping rag, and then they'd be dead or stunned or whatever, and then I'd drop them into the little antlion pit. At least get a little bit of merit for feeding a hungry antlion. But let's see. As a layperson now, do I still follow the 5 precepts? I do have a beer every now and then. I had a beer last night. In fact, I had 2 of them. So I don't follow the 5 precepts perfectly. With regard to lying, I am scrupulous. I do try to be honest. I don't steal. With regard to killing, yeah, I have killed a few insects. I haven't killed anything bigger than an insect, but I have killed a few insects. I killed probably lots of them accidentally today when I was tearing apart the chicken coop, because there was a couple of ant nests inside the chicken coop. But it has to be on purpose in order for it to count, I suppose. So let's see. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I answered that one. So I'll just move on to the next question from Hey It's Tig. And Hey It's Tig says, what was we? No, what? There's no H. What was we? And I asked him after he asked me this, I mean, could he be a little more specific? And then he admitted that he just wanted to hear me say, we was kangs and shit. So, there it is. I said it. Actually, we was Aryas. We was Aryans and shit. I think I'll just move on to the next question here. Also from Hayes Tig, is there merit in being hit in the head by a horse? Likewise, is there merit in being chopped in the head by a mattock? And apparently, he read a blog post that I wrote talking about my father's paranormal childhood. And when he was about 8, he got kicked in the head by a horse. Apparently, according to the story, he was trying to climb onto the horse by climbing up its tail, and it kicked him in the head. Fortunately, it had thrown a shoe and kicked him without a horseshoe on. Otherwise, he might have died. And then just a year later, he got chopped in the head with a mattock, and it caused another fracture. So he got his head broken twice when he was a kid. Is there merit in being hit in the head by a horse? Well, like I just mentioned, I mean, there must have been some mitigating merit in that he just happened to get kicked by the hoof that didn't have a shoe on it, no iron shoe. You know, sort of like me talking earlier about breaking my teeth and getting malaria and so forth. Um, it may have helped him later in life with regard to understanding um, like paranormal phenomena, what he referred to as the occult. I mean, that may have kind of been a kind of initiation, you know, sort of creating a certain liminality by um, breaking his head. Um, yeah, so it's hard to say because there's very rarely anything that happens to you that is 100% good or 100% bad. It's almost always a mix. It's almost always shades of gray. So yeah, I would assume that there was a certain amount of merit involved in these things, although pretty obviously there was a lot of demerit also. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Trumpisatva. And Trumpisatva says, if Nibbana is off the scale and unconditioned, then how do conditioned mind states and actions, i.e. kusala deeds, lead onward to awakening? That's a good question. And I wish I had something to drink, but I don't have anything to drink. I like drinking stuff. Not alcohol. I don't drink alcohol. Not even beer on these. But let's see. Yeah, it reminds me of a statement by Krishnamurti, and you can see similar things in the Pali texts themselves. For example, in the Pali text, like in the Satipatthana Sutta, you know, it will say if you follow these instructions scrupulously, then you'll either become enlightened or you'll become an Arya that's, you know, not enlightened but close to enlightened. And so there's no guarantee. And that reminded me of J. Krishnamurti's statement that you can open the window, but you can't cause the breeze to blow in. You know, you get your room, you know, squared away, get it clean and everything so that you can get to the window and open it, but that's the most you can do. So, I mean, there is no guarantee, and enlightenment itself is a paradox. And like I said earlier, within the context of samsara, that it may just be meaningless. It may just be impossible or just meaningless. So what you do is you just get yourself as open to it as possible. You know, get yourself cleared out, and usually in the text or in a lot of suttas, you know, you're getting into high mystical states that are getting you into some kind of worldly approximation of enlightenment. In fact, jhana is referred to as temporary enlightenment or temporary liberation, I should say. And the way it's really hard to talk about this. Talking about enlightenment and so forth is just, like I said, from a samsaric context, it may just be futile. But it's like, you know, seeing water instead of waves. And so if you wanted to see like the surface of the water as just water and not as getting distracted by the waves, you know, you're just seeing it as waves. That's what the normie does. I mean, I'm speaking allegorically here or metaphorically, but most people, they see only the waves. They don't see the essence. They just see the forms. And so if you're going to get to the point where you see the essence of the world and not just the superficial forms, you're going to have to see the water as water and not as waves, and I like this wave and I don't like this wave, and that wave is better than this other wave, and on and on and on. That's kind of the world that most people live in, is just superficial forms. So the way you do that is you try to create as much of a flat calm as possible. Like something like fourth jhana would just be flat calm. And then it's very difficult to confuse the water with the waves because there aren't any waves anymore. It may be absolutely impossible to get to just purely perfect flat calm. There may always be a certain amount of, you know, little ripples or something. But the less the waves are there to distract you, the more you're able to penetrate that and sort of transcend the superficiality of the forms and get to the essence. So that would be how I would answer that question. I'll just move on to Trumpasattva's next question here, which is, how does Orthodox Theravada Buddhism explain how the mind can be reborn in a lower state? For example, a human goes down into the animal and becomes a bird during rebirth. The bird arguably does not have volition in the same manner as does a human, yet rebirth is discussed in a one-to-one exchange in any suttas. How then can one reborn into an animal like a bird burn off negative karma of a human life, while a bird does and not have ability to choose kusala or akusala actions? Okay, there's kind of a lot to unpack. I mean, I'm kind of like wanting to go one direction with this, which really isn't the direction that Trumpasattva here had in mind, I'm pretty sure. But my father, who was a weird guy, partly because he had his head broken a number of times, including twice when he was a little kid, he was introduced to Buddhism by a dead Vietnamese Buddhist monk who was coming through a spirit medium in trance. So she channeled this dead Vietnamese Mahayana Buddhist monk, and my father learned about Buddhism originally in this way. And he asked this monk, or the woman in the trance anyhow, that can a person be reborn as an animal? And the dead monk he just scoffed at the idea. How could you fit all the karma of a human being into a bug or a bird or a goldfish or something? It just can't fit. He was just indignant, according to my father's recounting of the story. But that's not the question here. It's like, let's see, where's the actual question here? How can one be reborn into an animal like a bird, burn off negative karma of a human life? Well, the thing is, they're just stuck. There's the famous sutta where the Buddha is talking about how if you wind up born as an animal, then your ability to get out of the animal realm is very small. So the analogy is, you've got a blind sea turtle who comes up once every 100 years. He swims all the oceans of the earth, and he comes up once every 100 years for air. And you've got like a yolk, which is, let's say, a toilet seat. It's sort of shaped and kind of the same size as a toilet seat. It's floating out in the ocean. And he said the chances of getting out of the animal realm once you wind up there are about the same as that blind sea turtle coming up for air and having his head come right up through the yolk, or in my version, the toilet seat. So you're stuck there. Because as Trumpasattva points out, your ability to get out of there through volitional good deeds and earning merit and like understanding and contemplating Dhamma and so forth, it's pretty much gone. So you just have to exhaust your bad karma, even though as an animal you're stuck making more and more of it. You somehow have to exhaust that, and then having the underlying merit from previous existences as humans or even superhuman beings, finally they lift you out of it. Or maybe in some case you're just like this rare animal. You're the dolphin that helps the drowning swimmer or something. So I think I answered the question, but it's not easy. If you're reborn as an animal, maybe you'll be lucky and become like this pampered, I don't know, Shih Tzu or something, and then you might have better opportunities. You're not just in like fear and hunger mode all the time, just trying to survive. So I'll just move on to Trumpasattva's next question here. Do you consider Buddhism in the West to be a lost cause, or is this just a bump in the road as part of a longer process of transmission? while there is a bunch of problems in the convert community in the past 20 to 30 years, there has been a growth of monastic institutions in the West. Could it be that the leftist stuff will fade as the boomers die off, as Gen Z is mostly not interested in their vision of liberal religion, and the conservative traditions like Orthodox Theravada will continue to chug along as those fall away? Yeah, that's a timely question, I suppose. Um, yeah, I mean, Western Buddhism, most Western Buddhism is just has been taken over by liberation theology, which is just a kind of like it's just this mishmash of like third or fourth wave feminism and LGBTQ rights and um, like environmentalism to some degree, and just sort of neo-Marxism, essentially, progressivism. So it's just essentially so-called progressivism, as though decline and fall is progress, just putting on like a Buddhist cloak and being called Buddhists, and the followers of this ideology being calling themselves Buddhists. Um, but at the same time, I think, as Trimpasattva here points out, Buddhist monasticism, like Theravada Buddhist monasticism, is on the increase in the West. And the monks tend to be way more conservative than the Jewish lesbians teaching Dhamma in the Dhamma halls for lay people in various places. So, yeah, I think there is a very good chance that the whole progressive movement is becoming so unstable and insane that it's going to collapse sooner or later, preferably sooner than later. And the conservative aspects of Theravada Buddhism, because they have a much firmer foundation, they're not based on fads that became popular around 2015. They've been there for 2,500 years. And so it's sort of like a rock, even though it's like a smaller movement right now than all the progressive lefty cultural Marxist Buddhism stuff. I mean, you read the academic papers, like Buddhist academic papers, and it's all about LGBTQ stuff. I mean, that's seems to be like a major thread in Buddhistic studies nowadays. Is how can we justify you know like transgenderism, you know, using Buddhism, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I would be inclined to think that that the whole progressive movement, in its appropriation of Buddhism and pretty much every other spiritual system that they can get their hands on, and just turning it into sort of religion flavored cultural Marxism or whatever, that it's not stable, it's not going to last, and that there's always going to be like the more solid, more stable kind of Theravada Buddhism, that it's not going to die out nearly as easily. But who knows? We're just going to have to wait and see exactly what's going to happen. So, yeah, let's just wait and see. I'll just move on to Trimpasattva's next question here. A follow-up to this question: how does Buddhism, or does it at all, explain how one can see the future if a person can lessen or alter their karmic retributions? See Angulimala getting a beatdown after becoming an arahant versus being killed by his victim's relatives. Are there any explanations of how an Arya sees into the future differently from a worldly person? Well, again, this is one of those questions that I don't fully entirely grasp. How can Buddhism see into the future? I mean, from the Orthodox Theravada Buddhist perspective, nobody can see into the future because the future simply does not exist yet. So when the Buddha makes prophecies and supposedly, seemingly sees into the future, he's using his omniscient ability to see the way things are now, and then he's just extrapolating with his superhuman genius and extrapolating into the future. But that's not exactly the same as actually seeing the future. So, I mean, prophecy in that sense, I mean, in the paranormal sense, really doesn't exist unless you want to consider the omniscience of a Buddha to be paranormal. I guess that would be applicable. Um, how a person can lessen or alter their karmic retributions. Um, yeah, I mean, if you're enlightened, then I mean, like for example, there's the story of Mahamoggallana. He was one of the two chief disciples of the Buddha, and he was the disciple of the great disciples of the Buddha. He was the one who had mastered psychic powers more than any other, and because he was so illustrious and such a good example, there were certain non-Buddhists who hated him, and so they hired some thugs to essentially kill him, like just assassinate him, to just murder him. And he used his psychic powers to escape twice. He could just fly away or whatever. But then he realized that he had the karma to be killed because in some previous life he had, I can't remember the story. It's like he had deliberately caused the death of one or both of his parents or something. It was really awful. It was a long time ago, but that karma had never completely worked itself out yet. And so finally, the third time, he just let them literally beat him to a pulp. According to the story, there was not an unbroken bone left in his body after they were done beating on him. Um, but with regard to Angulimala, who was literally a serial killer, um, he was converted by the Buddha and became a monk, and then apparently became enlightened. And then he got a beat down, but at least he didn't get the wasn't beaten to a pulp like Moggallana was. But Moggallana was a chief disciple. So, let's see, are there any explanations of how an Arya sees into the future differently from a worldly person? Well, I mean, if you got psychic powers, you've got clairvoyance and so forth, and then that would help you to extrapolate into the future. You'd see more of the big picture than the average person. And the Buddha, who supposedly, I mean, according to Orthodox tradition, is omniscient, then he can see the big picture in crystal clarity, and he can extrapolate even better. But we've got limited knowledge. The average normie has limited knowledge. So, I mean, you can make guesses about the future, but you can't know for sure. So, yeah, even an arahant really cannot know for sure. It kind of reminds me of, was it in the book of Revelation, the Bible, where even the angels don't know when the day of judgment is going to occur. So, let's see here. I'm not sure if I answered that question very well, but I gave it a shot. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from our good friend Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana. And I still don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but it just rolls off the tongue now. And Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana says, can you please explain Tantra? What are its origins, teachings, why it's influenced many modern Indian religions, and what's up with the whole tantric sex thing? I had to learn about Tantra when I took a Religions of India class in college long ago, and I'm not sure what the origins of it are with regard to, was it originally like Mahayana Buddhist or was it Hindu? I know that the Hindus and the Mahayana Buddhists have like tantric practices in certain schools, but I'm not sure which one it arose with and which one borrowed it. But the whole idea of Tantra is that we are in the Kali Yuga and you just can't become a saint anymore. The times are just too decadent, too depraved, too much on the downhill slide for people to really perfect themselves the way Orthodox Buddhism or Orthodox whatever encourages people to do, since very ancient times. And so what they try to do is they just try to detach. They're like trying to use like vice essentially as just like a spiritual practice. They do like immoral things supposedly, or at least religiously disapproved of things, as a kind of spiritual practice, because we are in the Kali Yuga and there's no escape from these spiritually inappropriate actions. And so in Tantra, I've read that there are like the 5 M's that they would use ritually um, as a kind of spiritual practice. One was maituna, which is sex. One is maja, which is alcohol, just intoxicants in general. I think it's mainly alcohol. One is mamsa, which is meat. One is macha, which is fish. So they eat meat, and they eat fish, they drink alcohol, they have sex. And the fifth one, I think they've lost what it is. It's sort of like soma in the Vedas, where um, they just kind of lost the meaning of it. It's probably some kind of drug, but they just in the ceremonies that they do now, they just use parched grain, and I'm not sure how parched grain would be something spiritually disapproved of, unless it's just some sort of obscure food taboo. And they try to do these things mindfully without attachment, even the sex part. So, like tantric sex, I have read. I think Ram Dass describes it to some degree in at least one of his books. The man lies motionless on his back, and a female who has been trained to have sex without any kind of emotional involvement, like a lot of women kind of do anyway, I guess, um, that she's sort of rides him, and he's just trying to be there, just like as unattached and mindful as possible, just lying there on his back while the girl kind of rides him. Um, and the whole point of it is that if you can't escape from this kind of worldly defilement stuff in this dark age that we're living in, you have to transmute that into something spiritual. So it's like they're trying to transmute the darkness of the dark age that we are in into something spiritual, so they can use at least that as a vehicle to enlightenment. And it's very dangerous. And even the tantric people, like the genuine ones, not just the ones playing at it, they'll tell you it really is dangerous because you can just get lost in it. I mean, it takes a lot of self-discipline to do these things, especially the sex thing, without just getting lost in it, or just having it come back on you and you're making more demerit than merit, or whatever it is. So let's see. Why it's influenced many modern Indian religions. I assume it's just because it's the standard idea that we are in the Kali Yuga, and just becoming a saint is so difficult that there are a lot of like renunciants who try as hard as they can to become enlightened through the standard traditional practices and make themselves a perfected saint, and then they just fail, and then they just switch to something else like devotionalism. Like I guess at least some of the Pure Land Buddhists were like that, where they tried to be a perfected saint, they couldn't do it, so they just started praying. Or yeah, probably Tantra is the same way. I assume there's a lot of people who are just sort of drawn to rascality in general, who are just intuitively drawn to trying to use their own rascality as a spiritual vehicle. But I think I've answered that question. So I think I'll just move on to Sio Vaksha and Sipat Zidana's next question here. It's just kind of a long one. In the Indian languages, the word jhana is used for concentration, but samadhi just means meditation. But in Buddhism, I constantly hear people say the Buddha would say jhana comes from jayati, which means meditation, while they translate samadhi as concentration. Also, I heard namarupa means mind-body in Buddhism, but it directly means name and form, and was used in the Upanishads to refer to the process of perception, where a form is given a classification in the mind. This and some others have led to scholar monks like Bhante Punjabi to claim that the Theravada tradition lost the meaning of the words over time due to not knowing the language and lost their traditional context by being in a different culture. Meanwhile, most Buddhist scholars would say that the Buddha just used words to mean different things. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think Theravada really lost the cultural context of even these important words, or do you think this interpretation is a stretch? Okay, well, getting back to the top here, the word jhana, I'm pretty sure it just means meditation. I mean, it comes from jayadi, which means to blaze, to illuminate. And I mean, it also had a meaning of like meditation. Like jhana is what the word Zen comes from. It's like the meditation school of Buddhism. And I'm pretty sure that it means that in other Indian traditions also. Samadhi has a somewhat different meaning in Hinduism, where that's like the attainment. I mean, like um, I remember someone who was a follower of Osho, they were claiming that they attained Samadhi concentration. And that was like when you attain Samadhi, it's sort of like Kensho or Satori in like Zen. So in Samadhi may have a different meaning in Hinduism, but I am pretty sure that Samadhi, I mean, just going with, it's like placing together, which essentially is concentration literally. The Sam means together, and the D is like placement. So yeah, I don't think that Siovak and Sipat Zidana, or I suspect that he is mistaken with regard to jhana in other systems, or in like the original means um, concentration, and samadhi just means meditation. Yeah, because I think samadhi is concentration, and jhana originally just meant meditation, and then later on it acquired the meaning of like really advanced meditation. But I think originally it just meant meditation. Like in the Atakawaga, which is very old, it refers to a meditating monk as a jayi, or just a meditator. It doesn't necessarily mean that he was possessed of, these higher absorption states. So with regard to Namarupa, I do agree that, I mean, literally it means name and form, and I think it originally did mean that that it was just the way perception works, where you single something out, you single out a form, and then you put a name on it. And then Buddhism turned that into mind and matter. And I'm not even sure that the Buddha would have taught the reality of physical matter. I mean, he probably just was silent on the issue, because you just don't get enlightened through philosophizing in that way. So yeah, I would agree with that second part. And let's see, this and some others have led to scholar monks like Bhante Punaji to claim that the Theravada tradition lost the meaning of the words over time due to not knowing the language, and lost their traditional context by being in a different culture. Um, the culture didn't change all that much. I do think that certain words, um, they just lost, they forgot the meaning, the original meaning. Like one classic example is the word papancha, which was misunderstood by the commentarial tradition for centuries and centuries, until finally a Sri Lankan monk in modern times, back in the 20th century, wrote a book, Concept and Reality, I think. I've got it on the shelf back there, pointing out, just based on what the suttas say about the word papancha, that it really doesn't mean what the commentary says it does. So that happens. And then when Mahayana came along and started translating texts into Sanskrit, or Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, they really misunderstood the meanings of quite a few words. In fact, they may have misunderstood the meaning, ironically, of the word bodhisattva, or bodhisatta in Pali. Another one is the conventional truth in Buddhism is samudhisacca. They translate that as samverti sacha, which means concealing truth. So they sort of redefined it on purpose, or else they just mistranslated into Sanskrit. It is true that the Buddha would change the meanings of certain words, like karma. He's got a different explanation for karma than other systems. The word Brahman, he's just started using that as a genuine holy man, not just someone who was descended from this, ancient line, this certain caste or varna. So yeah, I think it's probably a mixture of um, just the meanings changing, partly because the Buddha just started using them in a different context, or with a different meaning, and also when you've got scholar monks that are writing most of the books. I mean, the real meditators, the serious monks, are out alone, out in a cave somewhere. They're not participating in these councils and so forth as a general rule. They're not determining what the dogma, the orthodox position is going to be. They're not writing commentaries. So there is a certain amount of just deviation, like what would you call it? Entropy in Dhamma, where just things kind of start breaking down a little bit. Ultimately, they break down a lot, like modern Western so-called Buddhism. I mean, it's almost unrecognizable compared with what Buddhism originally was. But yeah, everything is impermanent. Everything that has a beginning has an end, and that includes the teachings of the Buddha. So yeah, here's the question: do you think Theravada really lost the cultural context of even these important words, or do you think this interpretation is a stretch? I think to some degree it's one, to some degree it's another. I do think that jhana was misinterpreted, but I do think it originally did just mean meditation. And the four jhanas were originally just the four stages of meditation, so that even a normie who's meditating correctly would have first jhana, where you're still thinking and so forth. And then it somehow got turned into a superhuman mental state, so that now in Theravada Buddhism, right concentration is literally a superhuman mental state, and my battery is dying because I forgot to plug it in again. Just a second. It keeps happening. I think it happened last time too. All right, we're good. We good. That was down to 10%. Okay. So yeah, there's no escape really, and everything that has a beginning does have an end, and so Buddhism is in a certain amount of decline. An obvious decline if you look at what postmodern Western Buddhism has become. So let's see here. I think I'll just move on to Sio Vakshin Sipad Zidana's next question. And this one's a real personal one. Have you ever experienced any of the jhanas or arupa ayatanas? If so, can you describe them in any way that the suttas don't? Also, have you had the glimpse of Nibbana? I know you believe in the four-path. I know you, maybe he says don't believe, in the four-path model, but I don't know if you also don't think you can't get a glimpse before full enlightenment. Okay, well, with regard to the formless jhanas, or what he calls here the arupa ayatanas, I did write an essay, which I think is still on my languishing website, trying to explain that it's like an anachronism. Those got added later. And I won't go into the full theory here, but I do think that those are like an anachronism, that they just got added later. They're just sort of an artificial construct or something. But with regard to the jhanas, like I just said earlier, just like a minute or two ago, that jhana originally just meant meditation, and that there are four stages of meditation. And so, if you're just meditating correctly, then you've already got first jhana, even though you're going with a mantra or breathing in, breathing out, or whatever. But I do think, just based on my own personal experience, I did get higher than first jhana. I don't really want to go into details of that, but I have definitely gotten into meditative states where you're just not thinking anymore. You're just wide awake and your mind is silent. If you want to call that a glimpse of Nibbana, again, you have to use language to talk about this stuff, but again, it may be from a samsaric context that Nibbana is just meaningless, just with using words and so forth. You can say that Nibbana is the cessation of dukkha, the cessation of delusion, or the cessation of greed and hate and so forth, but it may just be ultimately just so beyond language that you just can't even talk about it. And it's best not to think about being an Arya. Anyone who thinks I am an Arya isn't one. That's going back to the Diamond Cutter Sutra again. I think I've already mentioned the Diamond Cutter once, but it points out that anyone who is an Arya isn't going to be thinking I am an Arya, because self-view is one of the first things that goes when you become an Arya. You don't believe I am this or I am anything really. And it's best just not even, when you start believing that you're something, you've pretty much locked yourself into this category, and it may not even be the correct category. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here from Sio Vakshin Sipad Zidana. and that is, what are your thoughts on the Vimuttimagga? And yeah, I have come across one copy of the Vimuttimagga. I was at a monastery in Upper Burma, and in their library they had a copy of the Vimuttimagga. And that was what the Visuddhimagga was based on. It was a earlier, um, an earlier commentarial work that existed in ancient times, and it was believed to be lost for a long time. And then finally they found like one copy of it in some palm leaf manuscript in some old monastery in Sri Lanka or something. And it's like an earlier version of the Visuddhimagga, and I just read parts of it. I didn't go over the whole thing. There are obvious resemblances and certain differences, I think, possibly, but just because Orthodox Theravadan dogma had changed to some degree. Some of the Vimuttimagga was now considered to be unorthodox, and then got revised and improved upon by Buddhaghosa, who wrote the Visuddhimagga, but pretty obviously had a copy of the Vimuttimagga to refer to, and he was just sort of modifying that to make the Visuddhimagga. And for those of you who don't know what the Visuddhimagga is, it is the primary commentarial text in Theravada Buddhism. It's sort of like the hub, and all the other commentaries to the different texts are like the spokes coming out of the hub, but like the Visuddhimagga is just like the center of the commentarial tradition. And the Vimuttimagga apparently was its predecessor, although I can't really say a whole lot about it because I was just sort of skimming through it just out of curiosity to see, you know, what the translator would say and that sort of thing. So we'll just move on to the next question. Also from Sio Vakshin Sipad Zidana. And he says, you said addiction is a result of deep down problems with perception and it's hard to quit because of it. Do you think that's also the case of starting a new habit rather than stopping? For example, if we want to meditate, are there any tricks to getting ourselves go get stuff done? Or is it also just a matter of perception and there's no hope until a crisis incident? Well, I mean, yeah, if you want to, it's hard to start a new habit, just pretty much like it's hard to stop an old habit just because you're in the habit of not having that habit yet. So, I mean, obviously, I mean, you can't just passively wait for yourself to be flung into a crisis in order to have the breakdown necessary to transcend your attachments or whatever. So, let's see, do you think there's also, yeah, I think, yeah, because you've already got these habits and it doesn't include the new habit. So, yeah, I mean, I think anybody's experienced that where you just habitually occupy your time doing certain things, you know, watching YouTube videos or whatever it is that you do, and then just starting a new habit. Like I would like to start reading books more, just because I just kind of got out of the habit after I stopped being a monk and stopped being a member of the leisure class. I have to work for a living and do chores like tearing down chicken coops and stuff. And you just get into this, I mean, you're just not in your routine anymore. So you have to just consciously alter your routine. But obviously, if you have a good motivation for it, then yeah, I mean, that's really essential. You have to have like a clear motivation, you know, a good reason to start doing something. If it's just sort of like this arbitrary whim, it's not gonna last very long, unless the arbitrary whim, you know, leads to something more solid. But yeah, you have to have some sort of perception. Like Schopenhauer, his doctoral thesis in university, his first main philosophical essay had a name like on the fourfold root of sufficient reason, and he said that one of the the four kinds of like necessity is like psychological necessity, and that is, so long as you perceive things in the same way, you're going to react in the same way to whatever happens. The only way you're going to change your behavior under the same circumstances is to change your perceptions. So there's that too. And if it may be that you need to change your perceptions to some degree by studying up on the benefits of this new habit you want to start, for example. You know, once you like educate yourself on the benefits of it, that may change your perceptions sufficiently that you don't need the total breakdown. to throw you into the crisis that makes you open to suggestion. So getting any tricks to getting ourselves to go get stuff done. Some people meditate better in a group. I mean, you're much less likely to just get up and wander away after 15 minutes if everyone around you is still sitting there. So some people do better in a group, although you'd have to find a meditation group that isn't teaching something that you don't consider to be acceptable. So that's a possibility, or really just read some of the texts encouraging meditation, read some books on meditation, like written by a serious meditator, just telling you from his own experience, you're going to get these kind of benefits, and then it may inspire you to meditate more. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. Also from CO Vaksha and Sipad Zidana. This may turn into a really long one, even if I don't include the really complicated question in this particular video that I mentioned earlier. So let's see here. The next one is, when I read ancient texts like the Law of Manu, it has a rule that you shouldn't marry your son to a girl with red hair. Also, there is some Mahayana story I read where the student had to get the guru a wife, and he got her a Brahmin girl with blonde hair, although she rejected him for his student. Did the original Aryans who invaded India have these features, or were these a result of later migrations? Where are all these people with these features we would consider modern European in India today? Did they all die out? Well, I've been thinking about that. Like, you had the Indo-Europeans who moved, they moved eastward from their homeland, supposedly going with the main theory, the most accepted theory. They arose like in southwestern Russia and southern Ukraine, like north of the Black Sea, like the Pontic steppe is where they arose, and that was we don't need to get before them, but that was where the Indo-European, or the so-called Aryan race, arose, and then one group of those migrated eastwards. They became the Sintashta culture, and then like the Andronovo culture. Some of those then migrated south into what is now Afghanistan, and then they started the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex or something like that. And I mean, as they migrated, they were no doubt interbreeding with other people there, especially if they're coming as conquerors. They're going to be taking the prettiest women and interbreeding with those, which is going to be, sort of hybridizing the people as they move into one area after another. How many blondes and redheads and blue-eyed people were still among the Indo-European, like the Indo-Aryans, when they invaded India? Still going with the standard theory. I might be insulting some Hindus who think the Aryan race or the Indo-European race arose in India a zillion gajillion years ago or whatever. Yeah, I think there were still some blondes and redheads and blue-eyed people there. I think you can still find like higher caste Indians who still have blue eyes. They almost all have black hair now. But you still find a lot, especially in the upper classes, like the Brahmins especially, they got like fair skin, and a few have blue eyes. So a lot of that would go back to the Indo-Aryans who invaded India like around 1500 BC or so. But then there were other Indo-European groups that did invade after that. One of the most recent, of course, being the British, like in the 1800s. And there are, British soldiers would mess around with Indian girls, and so you've got, Indian people who are like half Irish living in India now. So yeah, you had like various tribes coming through, conquering northern India especially, and the incidence of, blonde people and blue-eyed people and so forth would be much higher in the north than in the south. The south is mostly Dravidian, and I think there's going to be a question about Dravidians later. Very next question, in fact. So some of it, I assume, goes back to the Indo-Aryans. I think it's in um, what is it? Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras refers to like the standard Brahmin, the stereotypical Brahmin, as having like reddish hair and blue eyes. So in very early times, it was like that, and then it was just through interbreeding with the indigenous people there. Just over centuries and centuries. You have the Indo-Aryan ruling class. It's accepting. They're taking women from the other races, or the people that were already there. Also, sometimes they would, especially the kshatriyas, or like the military ruling class, they would sometimes just accept indigenous tribal chieftains as honorary kshatriyas. And there are some people who say that the Buddha may have been of that sort, where he wasn't even Indo-Aryan, although that's neither here nor there, I suppose. But yeah, so it's gradually they just kind of diluted out. I mean, their bloodline is still there. That some of the purest Indo-Aryan or Indo-European blood I have read, at least with regard to certain genomes, is in like Rajasthan in northern India. That in like Germanic, like northern Europe. Those would be the two main places, or so I have read. So yeah, the original Aryans, I assume that even by the time they got to India, there was probably mostly black hair and dark eyes, just because of all the interbreeding that they did from between their homeland and India, because they invaded and sort of took over, I guess, just various cultures on their way there. And so each time, they'd be taking the prettiest girls of the black-haired, dark-eyed people that were already there. And so gradually they're sort of diluted down. That's my best answer. I think I'll just move on to Ceofaction Sipat Zidana's next question. And that is, also, I read that the Dravidians are descendants from the Middle East, or Iran, that arrived into the Indus Valley around 3500 BC or so. However, there was an ancient hunter-gatherer population in India before then that some claim are some of the first people who came out of Africa. Which one of these do you think are responsible for the Shramana traditions? I heard you say that it comes from the indigenous population, but you called them Dravidian, so it's confusing. Well, I've read that just based on the study of skeletons in like cemeteries associated with the Indus Valley civilization, that the people there were a mixture of three different races. You had the like the Mediterranean Neolithic farmers they were like sort of black-haired Caucasians that came from essentially where the Neolithic farmers arose, like in um, like the Levant and Mesopotamia and like southeastern Turkey. That some of those, I mean, they spread out a lot. They spread all through Europe, and they got as far as India, and then they started interbreeding with the proto-Australoids, who were the first Homo sapiens inhabitants of India and Southeast Asia, and they eventually got to Australia, and then they mostly died out or got blended into other populations elsewhere, and they just, because Australia was so isolated, they still stayed, relatively pure Australoid in Australia. But so there was like a mixture of these um, Neolithic agriculturalists who moved in from the west. You had the proto-Australoids that were already there, and then you had like more Eastern Asian ethnicity. They were all kind of mixing together in this Indus Valley civilization, and that was the origin of the Shramana tradition. Is whoever was running the Indus Valley civilization, which, as I say, was according to some book that I read, was a combination of three different main ethnicities. And I assume the Dravidians were mainly these Neolithic agriculturalist Caucasians who were interbreeding and to some degree mixing with the proto-Australoids that were already in India at the time. and it's more Dravidian the farther south you go in India. So that's my best answer to that question. So I move on to CO Vaksha and Sipad Zidana's next question, which is, why do you think the original Mula Sarvastivada and Dharma Guptika philosophical teachings died out despite their monasteries living on and were replaced with Mahayana teachings? Also, what is the relations between the Mahayana and the Mahasangika? I heard things like the Bodhisattva idea originated in later Sarvastivada traditions and was rejected by Mula Mahasangika, so it's pretty confusing how Mahayana came about in general. Well, Mahayana was kind of a progressive movement, and I think it was sort of a combination of different things. Like the progressive movement nowadays, it's a combination of these different strands. You know, you got the feminist, the LGBTQ people, some of whom are at odds with each other. Just sort of the racial equality people that they want to do away with math and so forth because some ethnicities don't do so well in that regard. Get rid of university entrance exams and just go with the assumption that everybody's equal, which doesn't work, or it's not going to work in the long run. So I think Mahayana started the same way. Like two of the earliest strands of Mahayana, or so I have read, were Pure Land, which arose, according to the book I read, it was Warder's Indian Buddhism. I got on the bookshelf back there. That arose mainly in the south, and farther north you had sort of the Pragya Paramita, that movement, and there's probably other factors also involved. And I just heard recently that the Mahasangika branch of Buddhism, that was a little Buddhist history, about 100 years after the Buddha died, there was the first major schism where you had the Staviras, or the Theras, who were the more conservative in most respects, split apart from the Mahasangha. And ironically, the Mahasangha was a larger group, and it occupied mostly where the Buddha originally lived. So like Magadha and so forth became mostly Mahasangha. And they were more progressive. They were more into emphasizing personal intuition and inspiration rather than just dogmatically adhering to texts. So, I mean, both sides have their good points and bad points. The dogmatic side is going to be more conservative and less likely to just veer off into la la land, whereas they're just going to be like dry dogmatists with not as much inspiration. Whereas the Mahayana Buddhists, they're going to be more inspired, and you're going to have the full spectrum because they're going to be going all over the place, just from the ridiculous to the sublime. And I heard recently, or read recently, that the Mahasangha were originally calling, or at times they referred to themselves as the Mahayana. So it could be that it was mainly a Mahasangha movement, but it was taking other influence, accepting other influences. Like I think the Mahayana Abhidharma, or at least the main one that gets referred to the most often, was the Sarvastivadin version of it. So let's see. I think I need to read this question again. What do I think the original Mula Sarvastivada and Dharma Guptika philosophical teachings died out despite their monasteries living on and were replaced with Mahayana teachings? Yeah, I think is largely just fashion trends, just some older groups sort of dying out. I've read that there is technically still Sarvastivada monasteries in Japan around the ancient capital of Nara, but they're mostly Mahayana now. They're called Ritsu, which literally means Vinaya. That's like the Japanese word for Vinaya, or monastic discipline. And so they might have a little bit more of these like Sarvastivadin elements than most Mahayana, but still it's mostly just been drowned out just with Mahayana because they were just surrounded by it, sort of like the blonde-eyed Indo-Aryans, or the blonde-haired Indo-Aryans invading India, and then gradually they just, the blue eyes just disappear because it's recessive and dark eyes are a dominant kind of gene. Same way with fair hair and dark hair. So it's kind of along those lines, I suspect. The Bodhisattva ideal originated in later Sarvastivada tradition. Well, I mean, ultimately goes all the way back to Theravada and pre-Theravada, just with Jataka stories and so forth. Just the setting up of the Buddha as higher than other enlightened beings. That maybe I suspect that originally the Buddha was just an arahant, but then devotionalism and glorification of the founder made him like way above any other enlightened being, even though their wisdom would be the same because they would have zero moha because they're enlightened. So you've got the stories of the Jataka stories of the Buddha and his previous existences, just existence after existence after existence, like perfecting his paramis so that he can be good enough to become a fully enlightened Buddha. And from that idea, you had this idea that it's more noble and better to strive for being a Buddha than to just content oneself with being an ordinary enlightened being, when originally they may have been just the same, and that the glorification of the Buddha was just a very human tendency to glorify the founder of one's own tradition or glorify one's king or leader. It's just human nature to do that sort of thing. I mean, the Christians really took the ball and ran with it. They turned the founder of their religion into God Almighty. So, let's see. I guess I kind of answered that. At least I've contributed some information to the answer of that question. But I still have more to go here, including more from C.O. Vaksha and Sipad Zidana. So I'll just go on to his next question here. In this video, I'm not sure what video he's referring to, maybe the previous Q&A. In this video, you said only the 4 jhanas are original and that the arupa ayatana were probably just added later on as more jhanas. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier here. These seem to have come from pre-Buddhist tradition, and I heard you can go into these arupas without the first 4 jhanas with kasina, Brahma Vihara techniques and removing things like all buildings, then trees around you, etc. I have heard some people say that the Buddha probably developed the 4 jhanas himself, while the way arupas before the Buddha were reached with those visualization techniques. What are your thoughts on this theory? Well, I told you that I have my own theory on the origin of the 4 formless jhanas, or the 4 arupa ayatanas, and I do have that in I think it's on my website. It's an appendix to a different essay, so it might not. It's the one about tarot cards and astrology and so forth. It's an appendix to that essay, is giving my theory on the origin of the arupa jhanas, and I think that there were different ways of explaining enlightenment, and when they finally hammered down the orthodox position of Theravada Buddhism, they couldn't accept these unorthodox explanations of enlightenment, but they didn't want to just reject them just out of hand because they were too well known to just ignore them, and so they relegated them to the highest possible contemplative states, like the realm of infinite consciousness. There are at least 2 suttas that pretty obviously referred to Nibbana as infinite consciousness, one in the Digha Nikaya, one in the Majjhima Nikaya, and that became unorthodox. The commentarial tradition says no, it's not really describing Nibbana, although it pretty obviously is. And so, strangely, they're not even calling it the realm of infinite consciousness, which they could have easily done. But so it's the realm of nothingness. There are suttas where, like in the Parayatana Vaga of the Sutta Nipata, the Buddha is saying, just contemplate on there is nothing, nada, nada, nada of St. John of the Cross, nothing. And so you've got the realm of nothingness. And some people to this day think that Nibbana is really just nothingness. So in ancient times, apparently they believed that also, and so they didn't accept that. That's no longer orthodox. It lost out in the competition of Darwinian competition of ideas, and so they got relegated into an arupa jhana. So I don't think it's necessarily pre-Buddhistic, the arupa jhanas, but that's just my own theory. If you're interested, you can read the essay or the appendix to the essay. And so I'll just move on to C.O. Vaksha and Sipad Zidana's last question here. Also, what about Nirodha Samapati? Where do you think that came from? It wasn't something the pre-Buddhists might have known of either, but I don't know. Let's see. Nirodha Samapati, it's the cessation, the attainment of cessation is literally what Nirodha Samapati means. And if I remember correctly, sometimes it's expanded into the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, which means your mind is just kind of blank. And this is accessible apparently only to extremely advanced practitioners like arahants and I think anagamis, according to Orthodox tradition. And it's above jhana. And really, the ancient Indians, I mean, there's another version of this Nirodha Samapati, which is the signless concentration of mind, which is let's see, Animeta Chitta Samadhi. And I mean, that also is an example. It's described, for example, in the lesser discourse on voidness in the Majjhima Nikaya, where it's like higher than fourth jhana. It used to be that fourth jhana was the highest you can get. Then they add the formless realms. Then they add Nirodha Samapati. They add the signless concentration of mind. And it's just this, in my opinion, this Indian passion to just keep one-upping the ultimate. You know, it's like some Upanishads. I'm pretty sure at least a few Upanishads come up with a higher ultimate than Brahman. It's like either you got different schools competing with each other, and you've got one person saying this is the ultimate, and then this other school will say no, there's this other ultimate higher than that one. That's not really the ultimate. We got this higher one that we attain. You can't attain that, so you think that that second-rate ultimate is really the highest ultimate. Or you just have these intellectual Indian philosophers who just want to break new ground. They want to discover something new, even though in spirituality it's all been discovered already, at least the essential stuff. So I think Nirodha Samapati is another one of those where it's for whatever reason somebody wants to claim that there is a higher state attainable than fourth jhana. And there is a number of different ways of doing that. You've got the arupa jhanas, you've got this Nirodha Samapati, you've got the signless concentration of mind and so forth. I mean, it could be that I'm just a cynic and I just don't follow along out of just stubborn perversion with the glorious truth of Orthodox Theravada Buddhism, but still I am a Westerner, I have a critical mind, and sometimes I just look at this stuff, and I'll get into more of this a little later, and we're already over 2 hours, so this is a monster of a Q&A. But yeah, I'm not entirely orthodox. I just can't be entirely orthodox. I mean, when you come to believe something, I'm not the sort of person that can just choose to believe something just because other people believe it, or I think I ought to. I'm not even I think I ought to. It's just like, if you don't think it's true, you can't just through some force of will or something just start thinking that it's true. I mean, you have to have more evidence or something to change your mind. You can't just change your mind without that. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Shrumo. And Shrumo says, what is the karmic price across the spectrum of divination, tarot reading, astrology chart reading, crystals, talismans, prana healing, channeling or consulting a channeler, demon summoning, energy vampirism of prana or ether? What is the karmic price across the spectrum of this kind of stuff? Well, that's a question, isn't it? Golly. I mean, some of it is largely, it's neutral, although in a lot of Buddhist texts, several at least, that the Buddha is warning monks against any kind of like divination, which includes astrology or consulting a channeler, that sort of thing. I think the Sila Khanda of the first third of the Digha Nikaya starts off with this stock explanation of things that a good monk doesn't do, and that would include like astrology here and consulting channelers, and again, it's like omens and stuff. Monks aren't supposed to give a damn about omens, prognostications, anything like that. some of this demon summoning, I'm not sure if I've ever encountered that in the suttas, any mention of it. But obviously, if you're summoning a demon, that's not good. I mean, you're playing with fire there. Energy vampirism, again, that's a term that I've just recently come across. Um, so I'm not exactly sure if that was even a thing in ancient northern India in the Buddhist time or shortly after the Buddhist time. Crystals, again, that's like a New Age thing. I assume, I mean, there's mention of crystals in the text, but it's just with regard to valuable gems that are forbidden for monks to handle. Talismans, yeah, monks wouldn't bother with that sort of thing. So, yeah, most of it, like the fortune telling part, is irrelevant. You know, it might be neutral, it might not be positively harmful, but it's samsaric. It keeps you stuck in samsara, so that makes it something that a serious monk or renunciant who is intent on enlightenment, on transcending samsara, he just wouldn't pay any attention to that kind of thing. And some of it might become positively like immoral, like the demon summoning or the energy vampirism, but it's not really mentioned in the text. But the karmic price across the spectrum, well, at the very least, the karmic price is that you just remain distracted and kind of stuck in samsara longer. And with regard to something like demon summoning or energy vampirism, where you're like deliberately harming or debilitating, reducing the benefit to another person, then that's going to come back on you through karmic retribution. So it's either just a waste of time, or it's something that's positively malevolent that's going to come back on you worse than just wasting time. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Dread. And Dread says, I have a question pertaining to the Atthakavagga for a future Q&A. Do you believe that the state described in stanza 13 of the Discourse on Quarrels and Contentions, the 11th discourse, it's the Kalaha Sutta, and the state described in Bahaya in the Bahaya Sutta, Udana 110, are the same state? They are described very differently, but both appear to be the goal. What is interesting is they are a goal that can be achieved in this life. Okay, so he's asking if I think that the strange Zen-like statements in the Kalaha Sutta of the Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata and the strange Zen-like statements of the Buddha to Bahia, the non-Buddhist philosopher in Udana 110, if they're describing the same thing. So I happen to have cut and pasted them here. Fortunately, I've done a translation of both of these. So the weird Zen-like statement in the Kalaha Sutta, my translation of it is, he has no perception of perception. He has no perception of non-perception. He is not without perception. He has no perception of void. For one who has attained thus, form becomes void, for founded in perception is diversifying designation. So I also have the Pali here. It's na sanya sanyi, na visanya sanyi, no pi asanyi, na vibhuta sanyi. Evam samitasa vibhoti rupam sanya nidana hi pancha sankha. And it's kind of paradoxical. I mean, you have no perception of perception, you have no perception of non-perception, and you're also not without perception. And then finally, you're not vibhuta sanyi, which I rendered is sort of an educated guess that he has no perception of void. So just you have no perception of what is like beyond perception. And then for one who has attained thus, form becomes void. Because somebody is asking him, how does form become void? And this is his answer. And founded in perception is diversifying designation, which includes the word papancha, which is one of those words I was mentioning earlier that Theravada Orthodox tradition misunderstood for centuries and centuries. So that's what the Kalaha Sutta says. And then let's see, where do I find it? Oh yeah, here's the instructions to Bahia while they were standing in the street. And this Bahya just begs the Buddha to please teach him Dhamma, and the Buddha saying, I'm going for alms, this is not the right time. But Bahya says, we don't know when we're going to die, please tell me now. So then the Buddha says, well then, Bahya, thus should you train yourself. In the seen there will be only the seen, in the heard there will be only the heard, in the felt there will be only the felt, in the mentally sensed there will be only the mentally sensed. Just like this, Bahya, should you train yourself. And since Bahya, in the seen there will be only the seen, in the heard there will be only the heard, in the felt there will be only the felt, and in the mentally sensed there will be only the mentally sensed, from that you, Bahya, are not thereby. And since Bahya, you are not thereby, you, Bahya, are not therein. And since Bahya, you are not therein, you, Bahya, have no here, no hereafter, no between the two. Just this is the end of unease. So, I go scroll back up here, and Dread is asking if the no perception of perception and so on is the same as what I just told you. And I mean, obviously, even if they're not describing exactly the same practice, and I think they probably are, but in different ways, obviously they're teaching you what the mental state of an enlightened being is going to be like. So, in the Bahya Sutta, he's saying in the seen, only the seen, and which means that, I mean, perception may be still there, but it's like vestigial. It's like neutralized because you're seeing the sensory datum as, I mean, it's still the sensory datum. You're not processing it to the extent of giving meaning to it. You're not interpreting it. You're not having a running commentary on it. It's just what it is, and that's it. And because of that, there is no thereby, which is sort of referring to like causation of like keeping you like wallowing in samsara. And when there is no thereby, there is no therein, which means you're not in samsara anymore, because you're no longer clinging to it by like attributing significance to this stuff that's just coming up as the fruition of your own past samsaric karma, which just perpetuates samsara. And then going back up to the Kalahavivada Sutta, he has no perception of perception. He has no perception of non-perception. He is not without perception. He has no perception of void. Yeah, again, it's like form becomes void because it's like you're no longer clinging to it. You're no longer feeding your stake in samsara, so to speak. So yeah, I think it's essentially the same state. It is kind of interesting, though, that in the Kalahavivada Sutta, the person that he's talking to then asks another question. He asks if that state that the Buddha just described is the highest state attainable, or if there's anything higher than that. And then the Buddha says, and I quote here, indeed, some intelligent ones here do declare that the highest purity of the spirit is to that extent, but then some of them, claiming to be adepts, declare an attainment to which nothing that was taken up remains, which I interpret to mean that there are some people that say you're not fully enlightened until after you die, because you've still got this body and you've still got this thinking mind that can't help but think and perceive things. So just neutralizing the perception isn't as good as just being dead when you just let go of it. It's parinibbana in Pali. And then the Buddha goes on to say, so having understood these to be dependent, the sage and investigator, having understood the ways of dependence, a released one, having understood, does not come to contention. The wise one does not attain to this or that existence. So he's saying just wallowing in these kind of arguments is just more samsara. I mean, just don't worry about it. So, yeah, my answer to that question is yeah. And so I'll move on to the next question. This is from Mary, spelled M-E-R-R-Y. And Mary says, you seem to have read most of the suttas and commentaries, so tell us, why quite some important suttas are in the Khuddaka Nikaya and not in the four main sutta collections? Is there somewhere in the text explanation for how 5 Nikayas was combined and what criteria was used to combine them? That's a good question. For those of you familiar with the Pali Suttas, there are 5 Nikayas. You got the Digha Nikaya, which is the long discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the middle length discourses, the Samyutta Nikaya, which is the connected discourses, which means they're organized under categories. And then you got the Anguttara Nikaya, which is the numbered discourses, which is going with regard to numbers. So the Buddha's talking about the four, the four noble truths or whatever, or the seven factors of enlightenment. They'd be under the fours or the sevens respectively. So it's numbered. And then finally, and the Samyutta and the Anguttara are usually short suttas. And then you've got the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is the small collection. And that's just sort of a miscellaneous. It contains some very old texts. It also contains most of the latest sutta material, like the Jatakas, the ghost stories, the mansion stories, and so forth. A lot of the legendary, like the fairy tale stuff, is thrown into the Khuddaka Nikaya. And why some of the oldest collections, like the Sutta Nipata, are in the Khuddaka Nikaya, it may be that they were just so well known as a distinct text that they were just put there because it wouldn't make much sense to try and put them in other texts. You'd have to break it all up. Like they're not medium length; they're relatively short suttas. So you'd have to put them in the Samyutta Nikaya, which has everything organized by category, or the Anguttara Nikaya, where they're organized by number. And it probably wouldn't fit the Anguttara very well because there's not much mention of lists of numbered things in the. But if you're going to put them under the Samyutta Nikaya, then you have to split up this already well-known body of texts in order to put them under different categories. And so rather than do that, I assume they just put it as its own individual text because it was so well known from very ancient times, probably before the editors edited together their Tipitaka. And different schools of Buddhism edited things differently. Like a text that might be in the Majjhima Nikaya in one, like in Theravada, might be in like the Samyutta in like the Sarvastivada school. So they were edited somewhat differently, and some of these texts came before that, like the Samyutta, the Sutta Nipata. Dhammapada also, it's one of probably the most translated, best known Theravada Buddhist text. And that's relatively late. It's a collection of aphorisms, or it's considered by scholars to be relatively late. That's also in the Khuddaka Nikaya. I think it just might be that you've got these well-known collections of texts that don't really fit well under other categories. They just wind up by default or whatever in the Khuddaka Nikaya. So let's see. Yeah, it doesn't explain in the text how the five Nikayas were combined. Different schools combine them somewhat differently, although they're pretty much mostly similar. There's more resemblance than otherwise. But the five Nikayas were kind of an anachronism. I don't think there were five Nikayas in the Buddhist time. That it was later, maybe even the first council where they got together, they started compiling things and organizing things and coming up with an orthodox system. So I'll just move on to the next question here, also from Mary. Also, could you make a new playlist for archaic Buddhism videos? It would be convenient. If I make enough, yeah, I can do that. But I've only done like 3 so far, so it's not very many. Okay, the next question from Mary. That was easy. That was an easy answer. I appreciate getting the easy one, getting tossed a softball every once in a while, Next question from Mary. Is there anywhere in the Pali Canon description of meditation positions like full lotus, half lotus, etc., and which one is better? Well, that's kind of a good question. I mean, it does say that a monk sits cross-legged, and it doesn't really say how he sits cross-legged, although it was traditional for a monk, if he wasn't doing walking meditation, he was going to be doing sitting meditation. But it doesn't, as far as I can remember, it doesn't describe the exact posture, like the asana, the yoga asana. But there is a strange rule for the bhikkhunis, which can give some insight onto that. There's a Vinaya rule for bhikkhunis, which of course the modern new bhikkhunis aren't going to follow. But it is against the rules for a bhikkhuni to sit cross-legged because, according to the text, bhikkhunis were consenting to the touch of the heel. And the only full translation of the Vinaya that I'm aware of is by I.B. Horner, who was this Victorian kind of like lady scholar in England long ago, 100 years ago almost. And she had this cute little footnote under this rule saying, the question is, whose heel were they consenting to the touch of? And she thought they were sitting in the full lotus and that somehow their heels were like sticking out and rubbing against the heels of other nuns sitting nearby, which obviously she didn't understand how the lotus position works, because I mean your heels are kind of dug into your own thighs when you're doing the lotus position. So I understood what it meant because I used to know this girl. I was kind of sweet on this girl in high school. That she told me that she learned how to masturbate as a little girl by sitting on her own heel and rocking back and forth. And I assume that's what consenting to the touch of the heel is, for why bhikkhunis are not allowed to sit cross-legged, because they're like, some of them, the naughty ones, were like sitting on their own heel and like enjoying the contact. And there's a bunch of rules like that, like they're not supposed to stand facing the current when they're taking a bath in a river, just because the current is rubbing against their pee-pee or whatever, and they're liking it. So that would seem to imply that the default sitting position or sitting cross-legged would be what is called the Burmese position or the easy position, which is I don't know if I can do this, your legs are kind of like this. They're both kind of flat on the floor, one in front of the other. They're not like up in the full lotus or the half lotus. They're just both like this. That's my guess. It seems logical. I'm using logic here, using head thinkings to answer this question. Okay, next question from Mary. Another personal one. He says, I love you, Panyo, and I'm not gay. It's weird. Do you think we have some past life connection? And I can say I've had experiences like this where you meet some person and you might not even have really a whole lot in common, but there's just this chemistry that you just love each other like brothers. And this has happened to me a number of times in my life. You just meet someone, you just hit it off. There's like, for whatever reason, I mean, you love this person like a brother. And the feeling is mutual. I mean, it goes both ways. And it's not gay or anything. It's just brotherly love. And it's happened to me a number of times. And so I can relate to that. And there's I mean, from a Buddhist point of view, good chance that we were friends in a past life, maybe even brothers in a past life, and that it's just carrying over with karmic momentum into this life. So it's possible. I mean, I can't really say. I've never met Mary, spelled Merry, in this life in person. So I'll just move on to the next question. Also from Mary. As Buddhists, aren't we supposed to love everybody? Isn't that the definition of metta? Well, as Buddhists, yeah, we are supposed to love everybody, or at least we're supposed to have metta for everybody, which is metta. I mean, it's based on the same etymology as the Pali word mita, which means friend. So it'd be more like brotherly love or friendliness, friendly feeling, desiring good for the other person. It's not necessarily like what most people would call love. It's certainly not romantic love. Although in Burma, metta or mita it applies to just even romantic love, just because it's just the word for love in Burmese. So, but I mean, if you read about metta meditation in the texts, then a monk is supposed to just beam love in all directions. And there are suttas like "May all beings be happy-minded" of the Metta Sutta, for example, and it's just giving lists of all the different kinds of beings there are. It's an exhaustive list. It includes everybody. Just various ways, males and females. Like people, no, like the human level, below human level, above human level. This direction is all the directions above and below. It's just exhaustive. You're supposed to send this metta, which is at least sincere, friendly feeling, if not like deep spiritual love, to all beings in the entire universe. And it's not necessarily the definition of metta, but that is how it is taught in the suttas, and that's what you should do if you're able to. But loving everybody is not easy. That just all of a sudden reminds me of this story of Ram Das with Neem Karoli Baba. That Neem Karoli Baba, it was hard to spend a lot of time with him because so many people wanted to spend time with him, and he was just kind of like almost like a recluse anyway. He spent a lot of the time just alone in his room. And there was this period where Neem Karoli Baba would call Ram Dass to him, and Ram Dass would come and kneel in front of him, and he would just lean over and say, "Always tell the truth and love everybody," and then send him away. Then maybe a couple hours later, he'd call him again. He'd lean over and say the same thing, "Always tell the truth and love everybody." And this just went on for days and days. And finally, Ram Dass, and this happens a lot in ashrams, it's just like this pressure cooker. It's like a shit accelerator. He's having a really bad time, and he is just miserable. And so Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba, calls Ram Dass, and Ram Dass is pretty much in tears, and he just tells him, "I'm telling you the truth, I don't love everybody." And then Maharaji just kind of leans over very compassionately, maybe like stroking his beard, and just says, "Always tell the truth and love everybody." And that's really advanced practice, because some people are jerks, they're assholes and stuff. And I suppose the saying is true that if you really understand somebody, you can't hate them. But it's not easy to love everybody. I mean, I think I'm better at it than most people, even though I was a hermit for going on 30 years. I think that's one of the best things that happened to me as a monk. It's one of the most important things I learned is when you're a monk, you're trying to perfect yourself. And it's not easy. I mean, it's damn difficult. Even if you're trying with all your heart to be a saintly person, it just doesn't work that way. And so I've started having more compassion for other people being fucked up, because I tried with all my heart not to be fucked up, and it was not easy. I mean, I did not fully succeed. And so, yeah, it's like with other people, it's like other people are fucked up. It's like, yeah, welcome to the human race. But have been fortunate enough. I've had enough karma, good karma, like merit in my life, I suppose, that I've never really been like have really seriously fucked with by another person, like some malevolent evil person. Never been in a torture chamber or anything like that. Never been a victim of just chronic abuse, like as a child or something. So I have been relatively fortunate, which maybe makes it easier for me. But I think I'm just going to move on to the next question here. Wait. Just a second here. Okay, yeah, I almost skipped a question. This is the last question by Mary, spelled Merry. English with Punyo, episode 1. What is the difference between I have been meditating and I had been meditating? Because they're both past tenses. Well, Mary, spelled Merry, does not speak English as his first language. And so he wants me to tell him the difference between, and I'm not even sure what, it's like past perfect and past participle, I think. Had been meditating, I think, is past participle. No, that'd be had meditated. Yeah. It's past perfect and something something. I don't remember. But it's I have been meditating can include the present time, whereas I had been meditating, it indicates that it's in the past. So the main difference is it's I have been meditating. It can include the present time. The implication is that it still continues to the present time, whereas I had been meditating means you're not doing it right now, that it's in the past. And I don't remember what the technical terms. One of them is past perfect, I'm pretty sure. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Jules. And Jules says, could you briefly expand a bit on your feline naming schema? Was there a cat number 1? What number are you up to now? This is following up on a video I did with Brian Rue relatively recently. It's our most recent video with Brian Rue, where he's got a cat named Happy. It's his second cat in a row with the same name. So I call it Happy number 2. And then I pointed out that one of the best cats I ever had, possibly the best cat I ever had, was named cat number 2. And yeah. So, I mean, that was in Burma. And I remember there was a flood. The Chinduin River flooded. and it was really, I had to wade through chest deep water just to get to the village to go for alms. And um, one time near the congregation hall, I heard like a kitten meowing, and I went and looked, and there were these two half-starved kittens. They apparently, like they got, somehow they wound up there, probably because of the flooding. Maybe the mother just couldn't cross the water to get to the babies or something, and they were half-starved. And so we started feeding them. And one of them, cat number two, grew up to be a normal female cat. Cat number one, who was a boy kitten, and he was more starved. He was more malnourished than his sister, and I don't think he ever fully recovered. I think he was slightly mentally retarded. He was he was never like completely a cat, I think. And we lived out in this forest. It was like a wildlife refuge there, and there was a lot of predators and so forth. And cat number two, she eventually had kittens. She had two kittens, which I named cat number three and cat number four, and eventually they all just disappeared. I mean, um, cat number one, I think he probably got picked off by a hawk or something, and cats number three and four, I can't really remember. Cat number two, though, she went into heat and got the wanderlust or the lust wander and wandered off and just never came back. So she might have got picked off by an eagle or something too. There were a lot of predators in that forest that would make an easy meal of a little kitty cat, which they certainly also did with the wild chickens and so forth. So I only went one through four, and that was it. And cats really don't give a damn what their names are. Dogs can kind of appreciate their name, but cats just don't give a damn. So that was it. And then since then, I haven't really named any cats since I got to number four. I don't think there's ever going to be a cat number five. I'll probably just name it Attila or something. I don't know. So the next question is from Achala. I think it's pronounced Achala, A-C-A-L-A. And Achala says, I have observed that some Sri Lankan monks make use of money. A friend from Sri Lanka told me that monks in Sri Lanka can go to markets to buy food for themselves, and they don't go for pindapata or alms round. As far as I know, as per Vinaya, monks aren't allowed to keep money. What do you think of this? Is this still okay for monks to use money as long as they are using it only to feed themselves? Also, is it mandatory for them to go for pindapata? Thank you. Okay, well, poor Achala here is somewhat naive with regard to the state of Asian Theravada Buddhism, because it is my experience that most Theravada Buddhist monks, especially the Asian ones, handle money. It's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like 97% of Burmese monks handle money. It's probably at least 97% of Sri Lankan monks handle money. Maybe in Thailand, who they tend to be a little stricter, it might be only like 95% of Asian monks there handle money. Certainly at least 90. So, yeah, Sri Lankan monks, I mean, some of them have jobs as like college professors. They're teaching like Buddhism or Pali or something in a university and receiving a salary for it. Sri Lankan monks in general, they're pretty corrupt with regard to following the rules of monastic discipline. So I remember once when I was a very junior monk in Burma, meeting two or three Sri Lankan monks, and somebody pointed out to me, I was kind of odd because I actually didn't handle money. I was actually following the rule, and they were just like astonished at this. Like, how do you manage? And I was like, well, I mean, the same way monks managed in the Buddhist time, I suppose, because that's when they made the rule. So, um, yeah, it's just shameless monks or just mindless. I mean, monks just mindlessly following along with all the other monks are doing. It's like Christianity in the West. I mean, how many Christians in the West like gather not up their treasures upon the earth, or love their enemies, or bless those that curse them, or sell all that they have, give the money to the poor, and take up their cross and wander around casting out demons and healing the sick and so forth. I mean, just because the scriptures say you're supposed to do that, I mean, it's just beyond human nature to expect most people, even most monks, to really go for it. And Asian monks are just following along with the corrupt tradition. Western monks, it may be only half of Western monks handle money because they have to be much more serious about what they're doing. They're not taking an easy out by becoming a monk. They have to go against their own culture, against their own family sometimes. They lose their friends. They have to be really serious about what they're doing, and so they tend to be more serious. So let's see. Yeah, monks are not allowed to keep money. They're not allowed to keep gold or silver or anything that can be used as money. It's just strictly forbidden. It's just prohibited. It's called Nisagiya Pachidia, which means you can't even make confession for it until you get rid of your money. And most Asian monks are not willing to do that. You have to get rid of the stuff that you've bought with the money. So most Asian monks just aren't even going to do it. So they're pure. They're never pure, like for 1 second ever, because they've got this nisagiya, the stuff you have to get rid of before you can make confession for having it, and they just won't get rid of it. They just have no intention of getting rid of their money because it's just so convenient. Having money is convenient. So the question is, it's still okay for monks to use money as long as they are using it only to feed themselves? No. The only time it is allowable for a monk to touch money is if he sees a wallet or some money or a purse or something on the ground or has been left behind by a layperson. It's then actually his duty to pick it up and put it somewhere safe so that when the person comes back for it, it's there. But of course, it's not your own money, and you can't pick it up by the side of the road. It has to be on the monastery premises in order for you to be able or allowed to touch the stuff. Or another possible way that it's allowable for a monk to handle money is if some monk actually has forfeited it, and then the Sangha will pick some monk to take that money and go throw it away somewhere. Just fling it over a wall, throw it out in the woods somewhere. And I've never heard of that actually happening. Because, as I say, if they got money, they're just going to keep it or spend it. So, let's see. And then the last part of this question here is it mandatory for monks to go for pindapata, which is go for alms, take your bowl and walk through the village? It is not mandatory, but every monk at his ordination is admonished that he should content himself with eating only alms food that he has collected by taking his bowl and walking through the village. But it is allowable, for example, to accept an invitation to a layman's house and let them serve you a meal, that kind of a thing. So it's not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And I think one of the things that Devadatta wanted was when he tried to take over the Buddhist Sangha, was he wanted to make it mandatory. You had to go for alms round. But the Buddha said, no, it's not necessary, even though those who want to do it as like a stricter practice are allowed to do that. And it is good. I mean, it's a good practice. It was one of the Dhutangas that I really felt good about practicing, was eating only alms food. Eventually you come back to America, you just can't do it. Or I mean, I guess some monks can, but it's way easier if you're living in a Buddhist culture where you just take your bowl and walk through the village and people put whatever food in they want to give, and then when you get enough, you leave and you sit down and eat it. It's nice. It's a good practice. So I'll just move on to the next question. This could be a 3-hour long one. I mean, not this question, but this video. This is from Stevie. And Stevie says, what's your take on the Anapanasati Sutta's instructions for mindfulness of breathing? There's much disagreement on how to practice it, so how would you approach it in a strict adherence to the sutta? It seems to me that 14 of the 16 steps are active trainings that go beyond knowing the breath, so why not follow the sutta's instructions in their entirety? Can you shed some light on this? Thank you. Well, I actually reread the Anapanasati Sutta just so I could answer this question better. But I have to admit, I never really was much impressed by the Anapanasati Sutta. I think the instructions in the Satipatthana Sutta, the section on mindfulness of breathing, is actually probably more helpful because it just seems so weird. The sutta, it seems to me, is like, it's like anachronistic. I think it's like a later sutta containing some earlier material, but it's gotten to the point of just the long lists of, the 6 of these and the 10 of those and the 37 of the other, and just it just never really resonated with me. I never really was much impressed with this sutta. But anyway, the 16 points 16 practices here. It's let's see. I'll just read it. I've got Bhikkhu Bodhi's and Venerable Nyanamoli's translation of the Majjhima Nikaya that I mentioned earlier, and it's Sutta 118. So let's see. And how, bhikkhus, is mindfulness of breathing developed and cultivated so that it is of great fruit and great benefit? Here, a bhikkhu goes to the forest or to the root of a tree or to an empty hut, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, set his body erect, and established mindfulness in front of him. Ever mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. Breathing in long, he understands, I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he understands, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he understands, I breathe in short, or breathing out short, he understands, I breathe out short. He trains thus, I shall breathe in experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I shall breathe out experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I shall breathe in tranquilizing the body formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe out tranquilizing the body formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe in experiencing rapture. He trains thus, I shall breathe out experiencing rapture. He trains thus, I shall breathe in experiencing pleasure. He trains thus, I shall breathe out experiencing pleasure. He trains thus, I shall breathe in experiencing the mental formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe out experiencing the mental formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe in tranquilizing the mental formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe out tranquilizing the mental formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe in experiencing the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe out experiencing the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe in gladdening the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe out gladdening the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe in concentrating the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe out concentrating the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe in liberating the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe out liberating the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe in contemplating impermanence. He trains thus, I shall breathe out contemplating impermanence. He trains thus, I shall breathe in contemplating fading away. He trains thus, I shall breathe out contemplating fading away. He trains thus, I shall breathe in contemplating cessation. He trains thus, I shall breathe out contemplating cessation. He trains thus, I shall breathe in contemplating relinquishment. He trains thus, I shall breathe out contemplating relinquishment. Bhikkhus, that is how mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated so that it is of great fruit and great benefit. And I don't know what to say. I mean, that kind of thing has never really impressed me much. And those of you may have noticed, some of you, maybe one, have noticed that once you get past, I breathe in long, I breathe out long, I breathe in short, I breathe out short, all the rest of them are in the future tense. Like, I shall breathe out, experiencing the whole body. I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the body formation and so forth. So it's you're not even in the present moment anymore. It's like what they did was they like super organized this, and like you start off just breathing, mindfulness of breathing, and then they're trying to throw in all this other stuff, which are like the benefits of mindfulness of breathing, or like more advanced practices. And it's, instead of saying that, this is going to happen eventually if you keep going with it, they just say you're contemplating, this will happen, I will do this. And it's just not a good way, in my opinion, of explaining it. And it just doesn't resonate with me. I assume there are other people that, I mean, it's just wonderful, this is their favorite sutta or something. But yeah, it's just really this hyper complicated way of explaining something simple. And I think they just kind of went about the formatting of it in a way that it's, yeah, I think you'd probably be better off just reading the mindfulness of breathing part in the Satipatthana Sutta, or just breathe mindfully. So let's see, what's the question here again, though? There's much disagreement on how to practice it. Yeah, I mean, some of it is really hard. I mean, how are you gonna practice? Oh, I will breathe in experiencing liberation. I will breathe out experiencing liberation. I mean, were you just going to imagine it, and you just have to wait for it to happen? I mean, what's the point of even thinking that? Unless you're just kind of setting yourself up for it. You're kind of visualizing in advance, but you're going to visualize it wrong because you can't imagine liberation. So let's see. How would you approach it in a strict adherence to the sutta? I wouldn't practice it. I mean, all this future tense, like most of it is future tense of what you're going to do. And I mean, a lot of it, you just don't have any conscious volition over whether it's going to happen. How are you going to, I shall breathe in experiencing pleasure. I shall breathe out experiencing pleasure. I mean, you may not have any say over that. I mean, it's just whether it's going to happen or it's not. If you practice correctly, there's a good chance it will happen. You'll experience PT and so forth. But I mean, why they would put it in this form of I shall experience PT breathing in, I shall experience PT breathing out. I mean, if you're sitting there cross-legged thinking this stuff, you're not meditating. You're just thinking about all this stuff you're supposed to experience. So you're better off just following one of the other mindfulness of breath, like the saw, like a carpenter sawing wood. He's not watching the breath go in and out. He's just watching right where the wood is being cut by the saw. It's like you're just watching right here. You're not following the breath in. You're not following the breath out. You're just keeping your attention right here at the sensation of the air moving past your nostrils, kind of a thing. That to me is more useful information than this long list of stuff you're supposed to experience, but you may not have any control over whether you're going to experience or not. And it's all future tense stuff, except for just breathing in long, breathing out long, breathing in short, breathing out short. Once you get past that, it's all future tense. It's not really in the present moment anymore. So I hope I didn't just rain on your parade, Stevie, but that's my answer. And I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Ludovis Balam. And Ludovis Balam says, two-part question for Q&A. Did any ordained monk you met as a Mahatera ever confide within you a belief in having attained jhanas or described experiences which fit the rubric well for jhanas? If so, can you recall how they described it as a reflection on a first-hand experience? It's almost a taboo for monks to talk about experiencing jhanas. They'll just even ask them, and they'll say, "Oh, I can't tell you." But really, it's not against the rules for a monk to tell another monk. It's just against the rules for a monk to tell a layperson. But even so, it's like in Burma, I guess, at least in Burma, just monks they just don't want to talk about it, and most of them probably haven't, or they haven't experienced the super normal states that jhana has converted into over time. So let's see. I have met monks that almost certainly have considered themselves to attain jhana, as they teach a lot of that at Pa Auk Doya. I've known quite a few Pa Auk monks, including a few that really, some of the few that really did well, like of Western monks. There aren't very many Western monks that did the whole course that Pa Auk was teaching and Pa Auk Sayadaw, and that includes jhana. So I have met a few, but they just don't talk about it. Yeah. So I have met monks that probably have attained jhana. I mean, I met one old Sayadaw who said that he can just sit for hours without thinking, and probably that would be at least second jhana right there, because I don't think he was talking about just passing out. So I think I'll just move on to Ludovis Balam's next question here. Is there, and this is another one of those questions I don't think I fully grasp, is there a link between the power involved in talismans and psychokinesis and the teaching of abstaining from holding to views? Could there be a common ground that is responsible for some Arya exhibiting CD powers and some not? Yeah, I do not grasp this question. Is there a link between the power involved in talismans and psychokinesis and the teaching of abstaining from holding to views? It seems to me that the power of talismans and psychokinesis would rely upon holding to views. You have to have faith. You have to believe in something. Especially if it's like a talisman, it's this object that is considered to have some sort of power. That really the thing itself, someone can think that this chapstick has the power to heal them, and if they really believe it, they got the faith of a grain of mustard seed that this chapstick, just by holding it in their hand, maybe praying to it or saying some mantra, is going to cure them of some nasty disease. Is it possible that it would work? But this chapstick really doesn't have any nasty disease curing abilities. That it's just the belief in the mind. It's sort of like tarot cards or something. The tarot cards don't have any powers. I mean, they're just made in a factory out of paper, and they're laminated. They got ink on them, but they're not any different from regular playing cards with regard to the materials they're made out of. It's just the belief of the person using it is the one that gives it any power that it's got. So I would say that talismans are that way. Like the Lucky Charm, whatever it is, the Tetragrammaton or whatever. The only reason it has any power at all is the belief of the person that associated with that. And that is, of course, not abstaining from holding the views. I mean, that's the view that this chapstick or the Tetragrammaton or whatever talisman has power is what gives it its power. You have to believe in it. Like the psychic powers of some really advanced saints is different. I think that just happens spontaneously through just the wide open liminality of the enlightened or extremely highly advanced being. That it's not an act of will. They're not making stuff happen like magic. It just spontaneously happens. So I don't even know if I've answered this question, but that's my best shot at it. And we're getting up close to 3 hours, so I'll give it one last look see here. I really want to do justice to all these questions. I really want to respect you guys by doing my best to answer your questions. So is there a link between the power involved in talismans and psychokinesis and the teaching of abstaining from holding the views? That seems to be the main point of this. And I really do think there's a difference between like talismans and certain like magical things that are like acts of will, that would require holding the views, as opposed to just the miraculous stuff that happens with enlightened beings, or which can happen around enlightened beings like Neem Karoli Baba. He's at least extremely advanced, even if he wasn't fully enlightened. Well, people wiser than me that knew him better than me think that he was. That's just a different kind of paranormal activity that's just spontaneously arising through this portal to other dimensions in a human form. But that wouldn't be like, it wouldn't be like an act of will, because an enlightened being especially just doesn't have will anymore. They're not creating karma. They have no more volition. They're just spontaneously doing what is right, often just as a reflection back to people of their own karma. Like Ram Dass used to say about Neem Karoli Baba, is the better you knew him, the better you realize that there was really nobody there. That he was just empty. He was just like a mirror reflecting your own karma back at you. So I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Air Rain. And I'm going to have to do this in a separate video. I'm going to read the question, and then I'm just going to have to answer it in a separate video, because to do justice to this question would take at least 15 minutes, I'm pretty sure. But I'll at least include it as the question, and then if you want to know the answer, you can just refer to the Q&A 47A, or whatever it winds up being called. But Air Rain says, I think a large blind spot in the Dharma may be that when acting in a dharmic way towards people in the modern world, especially in a culturally confused and crime-ridden melting pot, more often than not, you are dealing with crude humans who are unable to receive or even recognize Dharma. Continuing to interact with them in a dharmic fashion will be met with no results, and in many cases even inflame or embolden their behavior, because they immediately recognize you as weak or passive and will double down and intensify their behavior or predation. Does Buddhism have any way of dealing with this besides disassociation, or simply allowing people to mow you down, steal from you, or kill you? Obviously, saying that your own karma put you in that situation does not solve anything. I'm sure it works just fine in a monastery full of strict monks. Lay people have to deal with predatory and criminal chimps every day on the street, at work, or in their own neighborhood, where short of quitting your job or selling your house, you must be able to protect yourself or use forceful means to make them stop. I guess the main question is, beyond self-victimization, karma blaming, or continually ignoring or enabling and dissociating, What is an actual solution for a layperson who is dealing with being continually assaulted or robbed by a person who doesn't give a fuck about your dharmic way of attempting to make them stop? So again, considering the length of this video already, I'm going to have to to do justice to this, I'm just going to have to make like a separate video. And if you're interested in my answer, then yeah, I advise you to refer to the other video. And so finally, the very last question of all, is from Mahavamsa. And Mahavamsa says, is it allowable under Vinaya for monks to curse people out using foul language, etc.? And it's strange that I studied Vinaya intensively and followed it strictly for many years. And I, based on my imperfect memory, I'm pretty sure that it's an offense to curse another monk, to just verbally abuse another monk. And I think it's a lesser offense to do that to a layperson. It's weird the way some of the rules work. Like it's a pachiti offense, an offense of medium severity, to punch, like physically attack another monk. But it's only a dukata offense. It's like the lowest level of offense to attack a layperson. So you can punch a layperson in the nose. It's only like the most minor offense. And I think it's the same way with like verbal abuse here. That, you know, cussing them out, calling them bad names, and so forth. Yeah, if it's any offense at all, I'm pretty sure it is. It'd be a dukata offense, just the lowest level of offense that is absolved just by confession to another monk. But this is called parusavacha, or like verbal abuse. Just calling someone, you dick, you worthless piece of shit, that kind of stuff. Or even you want to be more diabolical and subtle, you know, you want to just like humiliate them, right? Just in some long, intricate way. I mean, that works too. My father was good at that sort of thing. I mean, not towards me. I mean, he was a good dad, but some of the insults he gave to I mean, they were just genius sometimes. But anyway, if you're really trying to make somebody feel bad, and by saying, you're saying something with the intention of causing them to feel unhappy because of you saying it, that technically is parusavacha, which is one of the 4 kinds of wrong speech. So, I mean, even if there's some loophole in the rules that it's not specifically laid out as against the rules, still it's against Dhamma, it's against Buddhist ethics. It's one of the 4 kinds of wrong speech. Like, I might as well go into the 4 kinds of wrong speech a little bit here. One is just flat out lying. And lying means you're saying something that isn't true with the intent of deceiving somebody. Then there's pisunavacha, which is like bad-mouthing someone behind their back in order to get people kind of biased against them. You want to like make them not like the other person, so you're bad-mouthing them behind their back. It's sort of like malicious gossip. That's another, and that can even be true. I mean, it's like, you know, you're just saying, you know, this, I wouldn't buy a car from this person because he's, you know, he swindles people, something like that. If you're doing it just out of sincere, you know, this person wants to buy a car from someone you know who's trying to sell like a piece of junk at like, you know, $20,000 or something. If you're doing it just because you don't want to see them get swindled, that's one thing. You might be helping them. But if you're doing it, you know, they're maybe not even interested in buying a car. You're just wanting to badmouth this person, even if it's true, even if they are a swindler or whatever. If you're saying it for the sake of, you know, getting someone else to dislike that person or like them less, then that's pisunavacha. That's the 2nd kind of wrong speech. 3rd kind is parusavacha, which is harsh speech, and that includes bad-mouthing people, cursing people just to their face. And it can be true. I mean, even it could be true. I mean, maybe they really are an asshole or whatever. But if you're telling them that with the intention of making them feel bad, then that's wrong speech. And the 4th is sampapalapa, which is just useless chatter, idle chatter, you know, just gossip, that kind of stuff. Just samsaric spam. And those are the 4 kinds of wrong speech. So this cursing people out, using foul language. I mean, using foul language, just like you stub your toe and you cuss, that's not against the rules. So if you're by yourself, you stub your toe and you cuss, that's not against the rules. There is a weird, obscure bhikkhuni rule for the nuns, where it's a pachidia offense for them to beat themselves and curse themselves. But it's just a feminine thing, I guess, because there's no equivalent rule for preventing monks from like beating their chest and like cursing themselves. And that's it. That's the last question, and we're 3 hours. I think this might be the longest Q&A thus far. And I had to skip one question just so I can address it in a different video. Sakes. But it's been good, and if you have any questions you want answered, then if you think that I'm in a position to answer them, like if they're about Buddhist practice, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist history, just monasticism in general, living in Burma, meditation, that kind of a thing. Cats, my cats especially, cats that I have owned in the past, that sort of thing. Yeah, just include them in the comments below, or if you have access to the Discord server, use that. If you have access to my Subscribe Star channel, you can refer to that. And you're welcome to ask questions, and be happy.